It all starts with a cuckoo clock on the wall, completely covered in blood. Suddenly, the little wooden bird pops out of the clock, chirping to announce the hour. A man answers a call right as the cuckoo clock chimes, letting the person on the other end know he has arrived at the location. He confirms that it is exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, South Korea time. On the floor of the messy room, the primary target lies completely motionless after being taken out nearby. A shelf stacked with cigarette packs stands out in the blood-stained room. The man looks at the school uniform belonging to a young man named Ryu Kang-min and thinks about how annoying life in Korea can be. He notices the high school student badge and realizes just how tedious it is going to be to pretend to be a student. Ryu Kang-min lights a cigarette during the sunset and complains that the worst part of being a student is not being able to buy smokes freely. He vents that his cravings are so intense that he could easily finish an entire pack all at once. In the middle of a crowded sidewalk, the young man laments that he should have stuffed his suitcase with cigarettes before boarding the plane. He recalls that back in the day, even children could buy smokes for their parents, but now the country has become a developed nation full of strict health regulations. As he crosses the street at the crosswalk, he notices that the country has changed so much in 10 years that it is almost unrecognizable. Ryu Kang-min looks up at the massive modern skyscrapers around him and feels like the city came straight out of the future. He observes the huge number of luxury sports cars passing through the busy avenue. The young man walks calmly as an elegant woman steps out of a very modern red car. He notices how the lifestyle, the environment, and the people's daily routines seem much more sophisticated now. Seeing a group of guys watching a young lady take photos, he reinforces the idea that absolutely everything has changed around there. Suddenly, Ryu Kang-min looks toward the lake and wonders if things have really grown that much over there. He stands completely baffled when he comes face to face with a giant inflatable duck floating on the water. Despite so many modern changes, he notices that the beautiful cherry blossoms along the shore remain exactly the same. A little boy runs past him, excitedly calling out to his mother to show her the giant duck in the water. A family walks right behind them, chatting happily about going out for a duck stew dinner. This simple family scene makes Ryu Kang-min look away with a wave of nostalgia. He remembers when he was just a child, marveling at everything around him. In his memory, he was riding on his father's shoulders, thinking that the petals falling from the trees looked like popcorn. His father would smile and ask if he wanted to go to the theater to get some real popcorn and pick out a movie. Little Ryu Kang-min would think about his father's suggestion with great enthusiasm. The little boy would then happily shout out the title of a rather unusual R-rated movie he wanted to watch with his dad back to reality. Ryu Kang-min continues his solitary walk under the shower of cherry blossom petals. He goes on his way in silence, putting the memories of the past aside for a moment, but his walk is interrupted when a voice over the comms calls him honey. He complains, somewhat annoyed, because they will not even give him a single minute of peace with his memories. The young man pulls a rugged tracking device from his pocket, which displays a location map on the screen. With the device in hand, his posture shifts, and he decides it is finally time to get to work. Later, he comes across a sign that prohibits the sale of cigarettes to minors under 19 years old. He observes the scenery of a simple residential neighborhood built on a hill during the late afternoon, arriving in front of a traditional convenience store. Ryu Kang-min comments that they really built these houses in a very high place. He looks at the cigarette sign at the entrance of the establishment and feels like he is finally in a place where normal people live. On the inside, the small grocery store looks very simple, dimly lit, and has several shelves packed with organized products. Ryu Kang-min opens the sliding door and walks in, calmly announcing his arrival. He looks around the empty establishment and asks out loud if anyone is around. Since nobody answers, the young man decides to make use of the wait to do something else. He walks over to the cigarette shelf and thinks about whether it would be better to have a smoke outside while the owner shows up at that moment. He hears a noise coming from behind the back shelves and gets suspicious. A gray-haired man who was crouching on the floor asks if a student should really be smoking like that. Ryu Kang-min spots the man and quickly makes up a story, saying he is just doing a favor for his dad. The young man, with a smile on his face, flashes a very exclusive luxury black credit card. He places the high-tier card on the counter next to the card reader and repeats that it is his dad's card. The store owner stares intently at the boy with a serious and suspicious expression. Ryu Kang-min hands over the card and jokes, asking to split the payment into 36 installments, but quickly apologizes for the joke, holding a bag of candy. The prota explains that he watched a lot of Korean dramas while abroad and thought the man had the perfect face of a classic convenience store owner from those stories. The clerk responds that he is way off and reveals that he also just returned from abroad a short while ago. While a dangerous box cutter remains highly visible on the counter, Ryu Kangmin laughs at the huge coincidence, and the man agrees, finding it all very curious. The young man flashes a mysterious smile and says, "There is one more massive coincidence in this whole story." He points to a family photo on the desk and states that the man used to work in the exact same line of business. As his Ryu Kang-min begins to talk about contract killers, a blade flashes at high speed, grazing his neck in an extremely fast motion. The young man manages to dodge the sudden attack launched by the fake shopkeeper. The man grips the box cutter firmly and comments on the presence of a professional hitman from out of town. Ryu Kang-min, still calmly holding his bag of candy, asks if the guy was really sent all the way here to take his life. With a confident look and a smirk, the young man praises his opponent for being so well informed. The man charges into the attack, accusing the boy of betraying his own organization in an unforgivable way. He keeps advancing fiercely while saying that the young man eliminated his own comrades before running away without a trace. The adversary delivers a powerful blow and shouts that he was personally sent to eliminate the young traitor once and for all. The two continue to trade fast and violent blows right in the middle of the narrow aisle of the store. With the intensity of the fight, various merchandise and food packages end up crashing down onto the dusty floor. The opponent pauses for a moment and focuses his attention directly on the luxury card the boy was carrying. He explains that the mysterious organization distributes different colored cards to its contractors according to each one's rank and power. The man points out that, among all the existing colors, the black card is the rarest of them all. He observes the shiny card on the counter and says that this elite item is only given to the finest warriors in the world. The shopkeeper leans against the store crates and confesses that he had never seen or heard of anyone who possessed such a card. Ryu Kang-min calmly snaps his fingers and feels flattered to receive such high praise from an experienced veteran like him. The seasoned hitman looks at the boy with a cold gaze, analyzing his every move. The young man begins to stretch his arms casually, not seeming a single bit worried about the danger. The man asks if he really had the audacity to show up to the fight empty-handed, and the prota responds that airport security confiscated all of his weaponry. The shopkeeper stands up holding the box cutter and says he is very disappointed to see someone so important be so careless. He snaps the tip of the box cutter blade with his fingers and warns that the number 1 rule of an assassination is to always have a weapon at your disposal. He hurls the sharp piece of metal toward the young man's face at an impressive speed. Ryu Kang-min manages to block the projectile with ease and counters by saying that the number 2 rule is to always be prepared for an ambush. The veteran takes advantage of the moment of distraction and quickly leaps at the young man with all his might. A massive shower of sparks flies as the two collide violently in the middle of the dark store. The impact of the battle causes lids and shattered objects to fly everywhere, along with splatters of blood. The opponent makes an expression of extreme frustration and tries to understand the reason behind that betrayal. He manages to grip the boy's arm tightly and demands to know why he decided to turn against his own organization. Ryu Kang-min looks at the man calmly and comments that someone with his rank and track record certainly received a lot of perks from the group. The boy looks down at the cans scattered on the bloody floor and repeats the question, wanting to know the reason why the veteran also abandoned the organization. The man goes silent for a brief moment, lost in thought facing the young man's question. He shifts his gaze to an open can of tuna on top of the shelf and simply answers that it all comes down to a tin can. Ryu Kang-min repeats the word, intrigued, and tries to understand what a tin can has to do with the decision to run away. The veteran holds the young man and explains that day after day, he felt as if he were completely trapped inside one of those metal cans. Next, the man delivers another swift slash with the box cutter, trying to slice the young man from the bottom up. The young man manages to defend against the precise attack using only a metal can that was nearby. The can is sliced right down the middle with extreme precision, causing all the food stored inside to spill onto the floor. Ryu Kang-min holds the sliced piece of metal and praises the veteran's metaphor, saying that he actually really liked that comparison. The man recovers his stance with his box cutter in hand and asks in a mocking tone if the young man has been taking creative writing classes. He looks at the boy with absolute seriousness and claims that, deep down, the young man knows exactly what he is talking about. The two return to trading fierce attacks that generate bright flashes of sparks all over the narrow aisle. The veteran continues to fight with determination while venting about the terrible, hellish life of being just a hound that obeys orders without question. The blows continue to clash with immense violence in the middle of the darkness of the messy convenience store. With his eyes wide with rage and despair, the experienced hitman reveals that all he wanted most was a little bit of freedom. The man shouts with determination that his sole objective in defecting was to achieve that long-dreamed-of freedom. While the swift strikes cut through the air, Ryu Kongmin uses all his agility to dodge every dangerous attack. The opponent keeps forcing the attack with his box cutter in an attempt to hit the boy by any means necessary. But the prota counters with absurd precision and makes a clean cut on the enemy's neck. With his adversary wounded, Ryu Kongmin comments with his back turned that he must have gotten something very valuable in exchange for that freedom. Nearby, the enemy's blood begins to drip slowly onto an open can that is lying on the floor of the establishment. The wounded man holds his bloody neck and confesses that he only managed to secure one single precious thing. He looks up with a heavy countenance and reveals that this single thing was his family. The man explains that the organization did not forgive his escape and ended up eliminating his entire family. As soon as they discovered the betrayal, Ryu Kangmin listens to that tragic story in absolute silence and with an extremely dark look in his eyes. The man reveals that the organization always finds out the identity of each hitman's relatives to keep them under constant surveillance. Overcome by hatred, the veteran charges once more, stating that this eternal surveillance is the cruel method they use to prevent betrayals. He advances, saying that family members are used as hostages, while the prota dodges the blows near the store's stock area. In the middle of the confrontation, Ryu Kongmin kicks a large 44-pound bag of flour, which explodes into a massive white cloud of dust. The white dust begins to slowly blanket the picture frame that shows the image of the man's happy family. The hitman deeply regrets his decision, even though he knows that now there is no turning back. Ryu Kongmin takes advantage of the distraction caused by the white smoke and delivers a devastating kick that shatters everything around them. The boy glares at the man and asks coldly if he has not realized by now that it is far too late for regrets. The enemy, with his clothes torn and badly beaten, feels the weight of all the injuries he sustained in the fight. He looks at the broken photo of his loved ones and murmurs that he had to pay for freedom with the very lives of his family. He observes the elite youth and comments sarcastically that the prota managed to get away without any major losses in his escape. Ryu Kangmin questions him severely, unable to understand how he was capable of going through with it, knowing his family would be sacrificed. The boy glares at the opponent collapsed on the floor and says that people with that exact same mindset are utterly despicable. He confesses that he hates hearing that kind of excuse and reveals that he used to visit this small shop quite frequently. The prota remembers that he knew the real owner of the place for a very long time and that, on that very day, the elderly man looked so exhausted it seemed like he could pass out at any moment. Concerned about the elderly man's health, the boy says he had advised the man to go home and get some rest. He had kindly suggested that the shopkeeper close the store doors early so he could take a well-deserved break. At that moment, the old man looked at the photograph of his family and gave a response that the young man never forgot. The kind old gentleman smiled and explained that he could not afford the luxury of resting because he needed to work to support his family. The boy points toward the portrait and comments that the elderly man seemed to be a very good and hardworking man. The gentleman was a husband completely dedicated to his sick wife and his young children who depended on him. He spent his entire life putting in his maximum effort in that little grocery store that was barely 350 square feet wide. The prota shifts his gaze toward the floor of the shop, showing profound dissatisfaction. He calls the hitman a fool as he sees the lifeless body of the true store owner lying near the entrance of the establishment. Ryu Kangmin asks angrily if taking the life of an innocent worker was the justification the opponent used to carry out his missions. The boy takes on an intimidating stance and confesses that this entire situation is making him absolutely furious. He says he finds it ridiculous when people talk as if sacrificing their own family for the sake of a mission is the same as being happy. The opponent gets up with difficulty and asks if the prota does not also work with the sole objective of protecting his family members. Suddenly, the veteran attempts a desperate surprise attack. Lunging at the boy's back, Ryu Kongmin dodges with ease and states that thinking exactly like that is why the man spent his whole life acting as a mere hound for the organization. With his eyes glowing an unsettling shade of red, the young man decides to give a valuable piece of advice to his adversary. He states with conviction that for a true professional, family should be considered a person's very life. A sharp snapping sound echoes through the room right before a new brutal onslaught takes place. The entire structure of the store shelves collapses with violence, scattering debris and dust all over the place. Ryu Kongmin warns that living with a collar tight around your neck is a fate so terrible that the man would be better off slicing his own throat once and for all. The opponent tries to deliver one last strike with his blade, but his slowness leaves him completely vulnerable. In the blink of an eye, the young man executes a flawless slicing technique that decides the outcome of that deadly combat. He coldly repeats that the man's fate was so wretched that it would have been much better if he had just ended his own life. The defeated hitman stands frozen in place, unable to comprehend the absurd speed with which he was struck. The man begins to bleed heavily from his neck, while Ryu Kongmin laments the fact that the small blade he used was too short for a clean cut. Ryu Kongmin walks calmly and explains that he used only a sharp shard to make the decisive cut on the enemy's throat. The opponent begins to lose his strength and murmurs in shock upon realizing he has been mortally wounded. Holding his own small, bloody blade, the veteran tries to understand how he was bested with such ease. Ryu Kongmin looks back and notices the opponent's confusion regarding how that swift defeat happened. The young man decides to clear up the confusion and reminds his adversary of the exact moment the man himself had broken the box cutter. He explains that the enemy should have checked where that piece of metal landed after he threw it so carelessly. With a slight smile, Ryu Kangmin teaches that the number 3 rule of an assassination is to never throw things without paying attention. On the bloody floor, a large kitchen knife appears lying right next to the shell of the broken box cutter. The man collapses to his knees and despairs upon realizing he was defeated by just a single insignificant sliver of metal. The wounded guy asks if the Prota has just been playing with him since the start of the fight, but the young man immediately denies it. The boy reveals that his sole intention was to test his loyalty and find out if there was any hidden motive behind his betrayal. With a cold gaze, Ryu Kongmin adds with indifference that he has absolutely nothing personal against him. The opponent tries to staunch the bleeding from his neck and complains about how the boy can act so relaxed during a battle. The veteran realizes his own insignificance and concludes that he was just another ordinary hitman sent by the organization, but the young man disagrees and tells him he got it all wrong. The Prota approaches slowly with a focused look and warns that his true objective in coming to South Korea had nothing to do with him. Ryu Kongmin grabs the enemy by the neck with force and makes it clear that he did not make this entire trip just to hunt him down. Facing his opponent's astonishment, the boy shares that he only decided to stop by that convenience store because the place was exactly on his way. The young man lets the bloody man drop to the floor and reveals that his true primary target is someone far more special. He emphasizes that this person is so important and dangerous that he is willing to put his own life on the line to complete the mission. Ryu Kongmin stares at the weakened opponent and reminds him that the man had said his greatest wish was to achieve freedom. Looking down at the blood-covered weapons on the floor, the Prota silently wishes for the enemy to find peace. He leaves the location, hoping that with his passing, the veteran has finally found that long-dreamed-of eternal freedom. While silence takes over the messy room, the blood-stained cuckoo clock keeps ticking away on the wall. The little wooden bird pops out of the house once more to chirp and announce the hour. Outside the store, Ryu Kangmin makes a quick call to report that the side job has been fully wrapped up. He lights a cigarette on the dark sidewalk and comments to himself that the minor target served as a great warm-up. Observing the reddish sky of the twilight, he decides that the time has finally come to head to his real appointment. The Prota begins to walk with determination to go meet his true primary target. He stops at the edge of the street, observing the massive city in the distance under the sunset, and prepares to head over to the location where his major victim is hiding. The boy analyzes his school uniform, which is completely soiled with blood, and realizes that while the mission is not an issue, he will have to get the clothes tailored again. Ryu Kangmin looks toward the horizon thoughtfully, knowing very well that tomorrow will be an extremely decisive day. The scene shifts to an aerial view of the high school, where the start of his major assassination mission is scheduled to begin. The blue sign on the facade of the large school building indicates that the location is the famous Anil High School inside one of the classrooms. Several students wearing the standard uniform are already seated at their respective desks. A young female student with long black hair sitting near the window looks quite bored and oblivious to what is happening around her. Suddenly, the girl's attention is drawn by the sound of the classroom door sliding open. The teacher, who was writing equations on the blackboard, interrupts his explanation upon noticing the arrival of a new student. Ryu Kongmin walks into the room with his hands in his pockets and lightheartedly lets everyone know that he has not received his student ID card yet. The young man flashes a bold smirk in front of the entire class and casually asks if any of his classmates could spare a smoke. The narrative takes a pause to show what happened 1 month ago at the luxurious residence of an important congressman. That night, Ryu Kangmin was at the location wearing a patterned shirt and holding a black pistol near his face when he ran into an unexpected situation. He had been quite surprised to realize that a simple residential house possessed such a heavy security detail full of armed guards. With his weapon resting on his shoulder, the prota had ironically suggested that the homeowner make things easy and step into his own grave without a fight. The intimidated man was Manuel Santos, the powerful and influential congressman of that district. The politician swallowed hard and ended up accepting his tragic fate very tensely. But before surrendering completely, the politician demanded that the boy give him an answer regarding what he intended to do with his family members nearby. The congressman's wife was crying desperately while trying to soothe her little son, who was shaking violently from fear in her arms. The desperate father insisted, saying that his wife and son had absolutely nothing to do with his shady business dealings. Manuel begged for the hitman to release the hostages first, while the young man thoughtfully analyzed the request. With a friendly smile on his face, Ryu Kang-min surprised the man by accepting the request for their release in an extremely amicable manner. Ryu Kang-min watches the politician's family walk away and thinks to himself that his primary rule is to never hurt innocent bystanders. Unless he is attacked first, he cracks a small smirk and mentally reinforces that this is a personal law he will never break. The politician swallows hard and expresses relief upon hearing that his family members will be spared from that violence. However, right after that, the man coldly orders all of his security guards to ready their weapons to fire at the youth. He takes on an arrogant stance and begins to underestimate the prota, thinking he is just an amateur hitman with the weak mindset of a low-tier henchman. The congressman comments in a mocking tone that he had actually come to think the young man belonged to the legendary organization of Bathala. The story then pauses to show the imposing and luxurious facade of the famous Bathala Hotel Casino, glowing through the night. The location is known as an extremely refined environment where high-stakes gambling takes place, catering to the wealthiest guests. From the outside, the establishment looks just like any other sophisticated casino in the city. But deep in the back of that grand hall, there is a very special table reserved for secret dealings. Seated on a sort of golden throne, a mysterious man comments that one must have a lot of guts to accept a hit job so openly. The blonde negotiator, acting as the dealer, proudly responds that the business operations of that casino are completely beyond the reach of the government itself. She adds that the man's excellent reputation in the criminal underworld was definitely not just an empty rumor. The client counters, saying that if he did not have total certainty in the hitman's capabilities, he would have never gone to the trouble of seeking him out in person. The woman gathers the cards with extreme elegance and states that the casino works exclusively with the absolute best professionals in the business. She spreads an entire deck across the green felt table and kindly asks for the client to choose just one single card. The client agrees and adds that he already knows very well that the reputation and rank of the hired hitman depend directly on the card chosen. He observes the deck for a moment, concentrating on making the perfect choice for his objective. The mysterious man places his finger on the table and chooses the Ace of Spades card to carry out the service. The dealer smiles subtly and comments that the Ace of Spades is by far an excellent choice for the job. She warns, however, that the fee charged by a professional of such an elevated rank is usually extremely expensive. The client opens a massive briefcase overflowing with high-value chips and guarantees that the amount will be more than enough to cover the costs. Holding the chosen card, the man demands that the elimination service begin immediately. He asks for the target's current location, while the story cuts back to the scene of the congressman's bloody mansion. In the dark courtyard, Ryu Kang-min calmly lights his cigarette after being wounded and forced to react against the armed thugs. He observes the true massacre he caused all around him and rethinks his promise to spare only those who did not try to attack him first. The politician's wife and son cry desperately as they see the bodies of all the security guards scattered across the stone floor. The young man passes by the family in silence and offers his sincere apologies for the congressman's tragic end. As he walks away from the tragically silent mansion, he murmurs to himself that he knows he will have to pay for all his crimes someday. Back to the present, daylight illuminates the imposing building of Anil High School inside the classroom. Ryu Kang-min continues to casually explain that he does not have his official school ID, yet without showing any shame. The young man asks out loud if any of the students present would happen to have a smoke to lend him. The spectacled teacher stands completely shocked and speechless at the limitless audacity of that new student. The educator gets angry and demands respect for his authority in the classroom, but the prota just smiles and cheerfully introduces himself as the new transfer student. He spins around quickly and wishes everyone a good day, completely ignoring the uninterested stares of his new classmates. The legendary hitman known in the underworld as the Ace of Spades finally formally introduces himself as Ryu Kang-min. He lies, saying he came from the city of Daejeon, hiding the fact that he actually belongs to the mysterious secret organization of Batala. The boy knows that to execute the assassination plan successfully, he needs to blend perfectly into that school environment. For that reason,
he decided to enroll undercover as a simple high school student at that renowned institution in Seoul. He understands that in a country with such a high and efficient level of public security, it would be impossible to pull off a flashy hit without getting caught. The beautiful black-haired girl plays with her hair strands boredly, thinking that she is only there to meet her parents' expectations. Next to her,
another muscular guy covered in arm tattoos rests his head on the desk, with the sole desire of enjoying his school days in peace. Ryu Kang-min smiles amiably at the class and asks for everyone to get along from now on, even though he plans to eliminate his target very soon. The scene cuts back to the luxurious gaming floor of the casino, where several slot machines appear lined up against the wall. The blonde dealer continues to reveal the contractual details and informs that the primary target holds Korean nationality and currently resides in Seoul. Seated comfortably, the client observes his firearm and comments on the mission's destination being in Korea. The woman interrupts him to warn that there is one extremely complicated and mysterious part involving this specific mission. The client asks what could possibly be so difficult, and she reveals that the hired hitman will have no idea who the target actually is. The man is startled by that absurd revelation and questions what kind of meaningless joke that is, but the dealer guarantees that is exactly how it works. She hands over a manila envelope to the man and explains that the only concrete information provided by the client was the victim's name. Ryu Kang-min focuses his gaze on the envelope and asks if there is any other personal information available about the target. The blonde dealer tosses the document marked with a large X onto the table and responds coldly that there is no further information about him. The prota finds that situation very curious and murmurs to himself that he will have to hunt a target possessing only a name as a clue. He analyzes the sheet of paper with absolute seriousness, knowing that this mission will be different from anything he has ever done, finding the mystery quite interesting. He recalls that he had to conduct a meticulous preliminary investigation before taking the next step. The prota knows that the only concrete clue he has is the specific classroom where the target is supposed to be studying. He walks decisively through the school hallways and stops right in front of the sliding door of the desired classroom. He looks at the sign identifying Classroom 17 and realizes that there is a major problem ahead. The young man peeks through the crack in the door and discovers that his major victim simply has not been attending classes over the past few days. Ryu Kang-min analyzes the busy environment of the class and notices that the target's desk remains completely empty. The vacant school desk, illuminated by the sunlight, confirms that the prota will have to adopt a different strategy to track him down. Suddenly, a student with a sour look bumps into him in the hallway and aggressively asks why he is blocking the way like that. The muscular delinquent tries to intimidate the newcomer and sarcastically questions why he should make way for some random guy. Without wasting time on provocations, Ryu Kang-min delivers an extremely powerful kick that sends the bully flying. The arrogant boy flies down the hallway and crashes awkwardly, making a huge racket against the school wall. Other students watch the scene from afar, and the fallen boy tries to cover up his embarrassment by joking that the automatic door sensor must be malfunctioning. The beautiful black-haired girl watches the whole commotion with an amused smile on her face upon seeing the new guy stand out. The other students whisper among themselves in the hallway, commenting in surprise that he is the newly transferred guy. The young lady with long hair decides to approach Ryu Kang-min and amiably asks why he keeps standing there all by himself. The prota gives a casual smile and responds jokingly that it is just because he has not managed to make any friends at school yet. Observing the sunny school courtyard, he realizes he will need to put Plan B into action to get the information he needs later. The young man hides in a quiet spot behind the school building and lets out a frustrated sigh while taking a drag from his cigarette. He begins to laugh out loud in an exaggerated manner to draw the attention of the group of delinquents gathered in the smoking area. One of the girls in the group comments with a chuckle that the new guy smokes as if it were the best thing in the world. Finding his behavior cute, the leader of the bullies crouches down next to him and asks if it is true that he just transferred from the city of Daejeon. Ryu Kang-min confirms the lie, and the tattooed guy concludes that the newcomer is a legitimate resident from out in the sticks. The undercover prota realizes that this is the perfect opportunity to finally start building his new school identity. He begins to make up random stories about his supposed past in Daejeon, mentioning an old classmate who always caused trouble at drinking parties. The black-haired girl listens to the story with total excitement and jokes that she already figured the new guy was a pretty big deal in his old town. Ryu Kangmin laughs it off while the tattooed guy begins to think that the newcomer really has a rather interesting and mysterious past. The leader of the delinquents extends his hand in a friendly gesture and proposes that they all be good buddies from now on. The young man shakes the guy's hand and thinks to himself that those delinquents ended up becoming his very first friends on Korean soil. At the end of the day, the group of students crosses the crosswalk together under the orange sky of the late afternoon. Ryu Kangmin walks side by side with his new classmates while the sun begins to set behind the city's large buildings. One of the guys asks if they are heading straight to prep school, and the other confirms that their shuttle bus is already waiting nearby. The undercover youth makes a lazy face and grumbles quietly that he has zero desire to go study at night. His classmate boards the yellow bus, complaining about feeling dragged along against his will, and wishes the new guy good luck in surviving tomorrow. Ryu Kangmin stands on the sidewalk, watching the school vehicle slowly drive away through the neighborhood streets. He looks down at his own student uniform, and a wave of very old and painful memories begins to flood his mind. He remembers a dark night from his childhood when a closed vehicle drove away while he screamed desperately for his mother and father. The little boy cried, curled up in the middle of the darkness, gripped by immense terror over what would happen to him. He recalls the exact moment when unfamiliar men brutally ordered that the child be placed inside a ship as quickly as possible. Alone and frightened in the dark cargo hold of the vessel, little Ryu Kangmin had no idea what his final destination would be. One of the men in suits stated coldly that the poor child would be sent straight to the dangerous region of Angelos, back to the present. The young man focuses his thoughts and knows that if it were not for that terrible incident in the past, his current life would be completely different. He reflects that if things had been normal, that peaceful routine of his as a high school student would not be just a disguise, but rather his true reality. Suddenly, someone comes running up from behind and grabs his arm firmly in a very unexpected manner. Ryu Kangmin looks to the side and sees his beautiful classmate smiling while leaning into him, pretending she almost tripped along the way. The young lady begins to walk beside him in the middle of the empty street and affectionately calls him Cheolmin, while revealing that her own name is Hayan. The boy asks if she is heading straight home, and the girl confirms exhaustedly, commenting that her first day of classes at a new school completely drained all her energy. Hayan lets out an impressed sigh at what she is seeing. The young man asks if she just wants to unwind there with him. He looks up and observes the soft lighting on the ceiling of that private room. The prota is quite surprised to notice that even the light and the temperature of the environment are extremely comfortable. He comments that the bed is also very soft, but ends up getting a major jump scare when the girl begins to take off her jacket right in front of him. She agrees with a smile and asks if he did not think the place was excellent. The young lady continues to explain that in there, you can watch television and even play various video games. She points to the counter packed with ramen and says that if hunger strikes, there are plenty of options available. A mischievous smile appears on the girl's bright red lips. Her cheeks turn a deep blush, and she says he can have something really delicious. Hayan gets very close and asks him to pick one of the options. She climbs onto the bed and asks where he would like to start. The young man swallows hard and begins to think that this situation is exactly what people call a romantic date. However, the mood shifts completely when several guys suddenly pop out taking photos with their phones, and he realizes he just fell into a group bullying trap. The delinquents begin to laugh out loud at the newcomer's panicked face. They mock his expression on the phone recording and say he must be scared out of his mind at that moment. Hayan bursts out laughing and asks the others if her acting was not simply flawless. The protagonist asks why they are doing that, but the tattooed leader responds that that should be his line. The tattooed youth approaches, staring down the newcomer, and states Ryu Kangmin's name, mentioning that he came from the city of Daejeon next. He asks if the protagonist actually knows this Lee Sung-wan guy. The leader recalls that the newcomer had claimed to know the guy, and that he supposedly even drank heavily upon hearing about his school transfer. But then, the tattooed youth decides to reveal one minor detail about that story. He explains that the alleged friend actually cannot handle alcohol at all because he has suffered from a liver condition since childhood. The leader reveals that he called the guy, and he guaranteed he had never heard of Ryu Kangmin in his life. The delinquents surround the bed and mock his attempt to lie just to try and fit in at the new school. The tattooed youth says the newcomer messed up right off the bat by smoking in the middle of the classroom and warns how things are going to work from now on. But before the protagonist can even say anything, one of the guys slaps him violently across the face. The aggressor warns that from that moment on, he will be forced to open the door for the group during every single recess. The blonde boy approaches with a smile and suggests they continue the fun from where they left off. He grips the protagonist's shirt tightly and begins to pull the fabric upward. The aggressor tears his shirt open all at once to see if the newcomer is truly as tough as he looked. However, the leader of the gang notices something strange and lets out a grunt of suspicion. The entire group takes a step back in fear upon seeing the protagonist's imposing reaction after having his clothes ripped. The youth merely remains in silence while the atmosphere of the room grows extremely heavy. The scene then cuts to the luxurious Batala casino, where a conversation about a mysterious target who has only a name draws everyone's attention. The clerk of the establishment slides a document across the green gaming table while listening to the prota's decision. Wearing a suit and a serious expression, Ryu Kang-min tosses the paper back onto the table and announces he is going to turn down that job. She asks the reason for the refusal, and he explains that there are thousands of people in South Korea with that exact same name, questioning if he is supposed to eliminate every single one of them. The prota thinks about the exhaustion of having to travel suddenly to Korean territory to carry out another elimination. He looks at the plane tickets and knows that the rules require him to return immediately to the Bathala headquarters as soon as he finishes the job. The problem is that the memory of his distant family always ends up weighing heavy on his heart whenever he gets close to his native country. He fears that the EIA desperate urge to see his relatives might make him do something reckless or break the agency's rules. After all, he knows very well that the Hitman organization would not hesitate to hunt down and eliminate his own family if he did something wrong. However, the woman tries to calm him down, saying he does not need to worry about that kind of consequence this time around. She explains that this mission is completely different from any other job he has ever accepted in the past. Because of this major difficulty, the Bathala organization decided to offer him a very special payment. The ultimate prize for completing the service would be nothing less than eternal freedom from all his obligations to the agency. The young man is so shocked by the proposal that he ends up dropping his weapon right on top of the table. He repeats the word in disbelief, trying to process the idea of finally being a free man. The clerk confirms and asks if he truly never wants to have to return to that place after completing the service. The light-haired boy stands completely frozen and wonders what on earth he is looking at right before his eyes. Hayan is also highly frightened as she looks at the prota and murmurs in disbelief about what is happening. Everyone is shocked to see the protagonist's body covered in deep scars and extremely shredded muscles. With a cynical look, the protagonist cracks a smirk and thinks to himself that there is no other way but to spring into action. The prota's personal rule is to never hurt anyone besides his primary target, unless other people attack him first. He extends his hand in a threatening manner and warns the delinquents that this is his personal doctrine. In a fraction of a second, he lands a devastating blow directly on the blonde boy's face. The force of the impact is so brutal that the aggressor is sent flying and falls knocked out cold on the floor. Hayan is left jaw-dropped, unable to believe the speed and violence of that attack. The other member of the group also descends into despair and screams in terror upon seeing his buddy get defeated so easily. The protagonist looks down at the fallen guy and grumbles that controlling his own strength is way harder than he likes. Imagined without wasting any time, he glares at the other delinquents and commands the next one to step forward. The young man begins to roll up the sleeves of his torn shirt and suggests they restart the fun. The story then takes a trip through time to 6 years ago on a private and deserted Batala island called Kamatayan. A rusty loudspeaker in the middle of the forest announces mechanically that 7 minutes have already passed. The audio warning echoes across the empty beach, alerting that only 3 minutes remain until the end of the test. Beneath the water of the rough sea, a large amount of air bubbles begins to rise rapidly. Bound by heavy chains to a metal structure at the bottom of the ocean, the young recruit Ryu Kang-min desperately tries to break free. The young recruit number 55 suffers greatly under the immense pressure of the water while trying to hold his breath. The announcement warns that 8 minutes have already passed. An absurdly long time for someone to go without breathing. The boy's lungs begin to fail, and small air bubbles escape from his mouth as he feels like he is on the verge of passing out. Meanwhile, on the surface, the sea glints calmly under the blue and sunny sky. Suddenly, some completely shattered chains appear, tossed onto the sand of the beach. The prota manages to emerge and lies on the beach exhausted, while a small red octopus rests right on top of his head. He takes a deep, relieved breath and jokes to himself that he almost ended up becoming fish food down there. He stands up, dragging what is left of his restraints, and thinks of his grandmother in heaven, saying it is not yet time to go meet her. The boy lets out a heavy breath while the seawater pours down his tired face. But the relief lasts very little, as he suddenly feels the cold barrel of a gun pressed directly against his head. A tattooed man wearing sunglasses and a floral shirt coldly warns that the youth exceeded the time limit by exactly 1 minute. Facing the threat of death, the boy can only mentally ask his grandmother to at least let him choose how he would like to pass away. Several seagulls fly off, startled through the island skies at the sudden noise that echoes through the location. The imposing black flag with the golden symbol of Bathala sways gently in the ocean breeze. The instructor lets out a grunt of pain, quite surprised by what just happened. Using the flagpole as a lever in a brilliant move, the boy managed to disarm and subdue the older man in the blink of an eye. The man smiles, impressed, and praises the prota's ability to use any nearby object to escape a life-or-death situation. He questions if that bold reaction was just a final desperate effort by the recruit to avoid being killed right then and there. The youth responds with disdain that it is just common sense, and that his brain is not made of jelly for him to accept death without a fight. He reveals he knew perfectly well that the first round in the chamber of that gun was a blank, used only to prevent accidental discharges. Next, he racks the pistol firmly and warns that, from that moment on, all the following rounds are live ammo. With the barrel pointed directly at his instructor, the boy asks if he is sure that the other rounds are also fake. A thunderous gunshot cuts through the silence of the beach and once again startles the birds flying through the area. The scene cuts back to the present, showing the facade of a busy nightlife establishment illuminated by bright signs in Korea. Inside the private room, the blonde boy remains sprawled out and completely knocked out cold on the floor under the incredulous stares of his friends. The other delinquents begin to break into a cold sweat as they realize the sheer magnitude of the danger they are facing. The protagonist calmly claps his hands together to dust them off. Without showing the slightest concern about the fight, he lets out a disheartened sigh as he looks at himself and notices that all the buttons on his shirt ended up popping off. One of his adversaries swallows hard in absolute silence. Paralyzed by the fear of becoming the next victim, instead of continuing to attack, the protagonist simply crouches down to gather the buttons scattered across the wooden floor. The first phase of his plan consists of ensuring a fair justification, so that the situation never looks like a simple turf war. For his disguise to remain secure, the conflict needs to look like a misunderstanding where both sides decided to participate of their own free will. He quietly laments over having his clothes ruined, commenting that he had just bought that school uniform. One of the delinquents grows furious at his distraction and charges from behind, wielding a fire extinguisher. The aggressor delivers a violent swing, shouting that the newcomer will soon be wearing a hospital gown. However, the bully faces an unbelievable reaction and freezes in surprise upon seeing his attack blocked. The protagonist grips the metal extinguisher with a single hand and chillingly counters that he does not have health insurance. The criminals go into shock upon realizing that he dented the metal object using nothing but his bare hands. The protagonist decides it is time to use brute force to leave an unforgettable mark on those boys' minds. He grabs the aggressor's face and forces him to his knees in a humiliating fashion before finalizing the blow. The youth slams the delinquent against the floor with so much violence that the entire structure of the room seems to shake. Hayan takes a step back, completely terrified upon witnessing that display of power. She brings her hands to her mouth and begins to stammer, unable to finish her sentence. The girl panics as she sees that her buddy's head smashed through the wood and ended up stuffed right in the middle of her bed. She screams desperately upon realizing that the brand new piece of furniture was completely destroyed by the impact of the body. The protagonist calmly turns to the survivors and warns that he has just one very simple question to ask them. The other boy and Hayan cower in fear, screaming desperately for the protagonist not to hit a woman. Without caring about the uproar, the prota questions them about the whereabouts of another classmate who usually hangs out with the gang. He refers specifically to the student repeating the grade from the other class who almost never shows up to attend lessons. The protagonist steps toward the frightened boy and demands to know the exact location of this mysterious student. With a cold gaze, he counters by asking if there is some secret preventing him from getting this information. The delinquent breaks into a cold sweat and is so terrified by the psychological pressure that he can barely form an answer. Overcome by panic, the boy lets out a sharp cry and goes running desperately toward the ensuite bathroom. He locks himself in the bathroom, screaming that he is going to get beaten anyway, even if he opens his mouth to say what he knows. However, a thunderous crash echoes as the wooden door begins to be destroyed with extreme ease. The frame and the latches are completely useless, and the entrance to the room slowly opens up before the runaway. The protagonist appears in the gap of the destroyed door and guarantees in a calm voice that he will not lay a finger on him if he cooperates. However, looking inside the bathroom, the prota lets out a confused murmur upon noticing something unexpected. He takes a few steps into the room and wonders where on earth the boy managed to escape to in such a tiny space. Silence takes over the bathroom while the protagonist searches for any clue of his whereabouts. Suddenly, the delinquent emerges from the shadows behind the protagonist and wraps a metal hose tightly around his neck. The aggressor pulls the object with all his strength and shouts proudly that his great childhood dream was always to be a movie actor. But all that arrogance vanishes in an instant when the protagonist simply shatters the metal hose using only his arms. He looks back with disdain and comments that he also understands a thing or two about the art of performance. Next, the youth positions himself and warns that his preferred genre is actually action and suspense cinema. He delivers an avenging kick that hurls the delinquent against the bathroom wall, shattering the tiles into dozens of pieces. With the destructive impact, the plumbing ruptures, and a heavy downpour of water begins to gush across the entire room. The aggressor falls completely knocked out on the wet floor, while the water continues to pour over his motionless body. Outside, the girl lets out a hysterical and desperate scream upon realizing that all her friends have been massacred. She begs desperately for the leader of the gang to flee with her on an electric scooter to try and escape that monster. The protagonist steps out of the drenched bathroom and laments that all that destruction could have been avoided if they had just answered his question. In total panic, the girl begins to slap her leader's back, begging for him to open the door as fast as possible. The tattooed youth finally grabs the handle of the exit door, trying to maintain his composure facing the extreme situation. He begins to remember his glorious past as a promising young athlete in the qualifiers for the mixed martial arts national team. He recalls that he was one of the heavy favorites for the title and that he could have won cash prizes and a lot of fame in the sport. Overcome by a sudden surge of fighter's pride, he squeezes the handle with all the strength of his fists. The leader slowly turns around and warns that with those very hands, he was capable of crushing the skull of any adversary in the ring. The protagonist merely stares at him with a neutral and totally bored expression, without showing any kind of fear. The big guy advances with determination and confesses that he is very excited to finally face an opponent who is truly strong. He shouts the protagonist's name with fury, while throwing the entire weight of his body to deliver a definitive strike. The fighter proposes a deadly match where only one of them will walk out of that room in one piece. A deafening crash echoes through the walls of the room at the exact moment the violent confrontation begins. The violent combat in the bedroom next door causes the furniture in the neighboring room to begin shaking intensely. A youth in the next room breaks into a nervous sweat and comments that the noises coming from the adjacent wall are quite intense. He tries to quickly explain himself to his girlfriend, clarifying that he was talking about the people staying in the room next door. The girl sighs boredly and asks if he is just going to sit there listening to other people's commotion. With blushing cheeks, the boyfriend thinks that the best way to get payback for that annoying noise is to make even more noise. He stands up excitedly on the bed and declares that, from that moment on, they are going to give them a taste of their own medicine. However, before he can do anything, the wall suddenly explodes with the body of the delinquent leader being hurled right through it. The nosy neighbor is left in a complete state of shock, unable to even lower his thumb facing the unbelievable destruction. The tattooed big guy falls totally defeated and twitching in the middle of the rubble of the broken wall. The protagonist appears in the massive open hole and ironically complains about how buildings nowadays are made with terrible quality materials. The youth observes the surviving girl try to make a run for the exit, knowing that without their leader, the group loses all its strength. She shakes the door handle desperately and curses her own accomplice for breaking the door latch during the commotion. A frightening shadow looms right behind the girl, and a cold voice asks what exactly she thinks she is doing. In an ironic tone, the protagonist points to the notice and explains that the door is a push, not a pull. Completely overwhelmed by panic, she collapses to the floor, begging for forgiveness and promising to do anything as long as she does not get beaten up. The prota gives a calm smile and confesses that, in reality, he never had any intention of raising a hand against her. He crouches down to her level and gently explains that he only needs a small favor that any normal student would do. He delicately lifts the frightened girl's chin and states that she is the only one there capable of helping him with this task. With a mesmerizing gaze, he asks if she will cooperate willingly, obtaining an immediate positive response from the trembling girl. With the silent agreement sealed, the protagonist decides it is time to start acting to fulfill his true objective. He smiles slightly and brings back the topic of the mysterious flunked student who never shows up for classes. The scene cuts to the dark city night as the protagonist wants to know more about his target's personality and routine. In a dark room, a mob boss calmly dines with his henchmen while discussing their illegal businesses with disdain. The sound of a door opening interrupts the group's meal, and one of the bald henchmen sharply asks who just walked in. The mysterious visitor reveals from behind that this very den is precisely the place responsible for distributing forbidden recordings across the internet. He takes calm, steady steps into enemy territory without showing a single bit of hesitation. Ryu Kang-min raises his eyes and asks directly if he has finally found their correct hideout. The gang leader looks at the youth with mockery and sneers at the intruder's unusual appearance. He comments to his henchmen that the boy definitely does not look like a police detective. Several henchmen with tattooed arms surround the protagonist from all sides and demand to know which rival faction he belongs to. One of them asks if the youth was sent by the well-known criminal faction of Singil to attack them. Another henchman grows suspicious and questions if his origin is actually the dangerous Hooksuk gang. Ryu Kang-min merely remains in absolute silence, completely ignoring the mobster's foolish questions. The protagonist begins to move his hand slowly toward the inside of his black leather jacket. He breaks the silence, drawing the attention of all the henchmen surrounding him in a cold manner. The youth asks if they are truly the ones responsible for the criminal recording and distribution of those media files. The mafia boss lets out a sarcastic laugh and warns the boy to be very careful with the words he uses inside there. He defends himself by cynically saying that his gang merely works to satisfy their clients' deepest hidden desires. The leader adds proudly that people pay fortunes in cash to have access to that kind of exclusive material. He concludes shamelessly that the entire illegal operation is actually nothing more than a simple, fair business transaction for both sides. In a friendly yet mocking tone, he asks the newcomer to stop using such harsh terms to refer to their work. In response to the leader's mockery, the protagonist pulls his mysterious black card with the golden crest out of his pocket. He holds the elite object between his fingers and warns that he has an important announcement to give to the gang. The youth extends the black card right in front of the mobster's wide eyes. He reveals in a calm voice that the true client behind that extermination contract is very close by. To everyone's absolute surprise in the room, the protagonist declares that he himself is the one who ordered the hit on the entire gang. The mob boss widens his eyes, unable to process the audacity of that unbelievable revelation. Ryu Kang-min cracks a slight smile and warns that the time for small talk between them is finally over. He coldly states that, as both the client and the executor of the mission, he himself will make sure to deliver their final payment. He concludes with a deadly look that the only currency of payment those criminals are going to receive tonight will be their own blood. He demands with a firm gaze that they immediately take down the video they illegally published. One of the large henchmen finds amusement in the youth's audacity and mocks him, telling him to check his zipper before trying to give orders. The henchman charges into the attack, confident that he will make the intruder wet himself from fear in a matter of seconds. The other henchmen watch it all laughing, commenting that the entire office is going to reek because of the intruder's fear. However, their laughter is cut short when a spray of blood splatters violently through the air. The aggressor stumbles back completely in shock and begins to shake while holding the side of his own face. He drops to his knees on the floor, howling in pain upon realizing that one of his ears was severed by a precise shot. The bald mobster tries to make sense of what happened and realizes that the deafening noise from earlier was actually a firearm discharge. Before he can react, the barrel of a black pistol is pressed coldly right against the side of his head. Without hesitating for a single second, the protagonist pulls the trigger and drops another of the henchmen who were trying to close in. The room fills with blood while the survivors watch terrified at the ease with which their comrades were taken down. The last henchman standing breaks into a panic sweat and stammers as he confirms that the intruder is indeed carrying a real lethal weapon. He screams in desperation to his boss that the blonde boy is armed and shooting to kill. The protagonist wipes the splattered blood from his face with his arm and calmly repeats the order for them to delete the video from the internet. The gang leader panics in his chair and tries to convince himself that that cannot be a real pistol. Suddenly, one of the henchmen attempts a final desperate gamble and charges from behind to try and wrestle the weapon from the youth's hands. However, the protagonist merely aims the pistol backward and fires a precise shot without even needing to look at the aggressor. With an even colder gaze and his face partially soiled with blood, he repeats the demand mercilessly. One of the wounded criminals desperately tries to convince the others that that must be just a modified toy gun. He shouts that nobody there should feel afraid of a boy with a toy, but ends up groaning in pain right after, driven by desperation. The final two henchmen let out a loud shout and charge together to try and subdue the intruder once and for all. The print of the armed bunny on the back of the youth's jacket seems to mock the mobster's pathetic attempt at an attack. With swift and surgical movements, he fires two precise shots that strike the chest of each of the aggressors. The criminals' bodies crash heavily against the concrete floor, joining the puddle of blood spreading across the room. Within a few seconds, absolute silence returns to the environment, with only the protagonist left standing in the middle of the massacre. He slips the pistol back into the holster beneath his jacket with the utmost naturalness in the world. The gang leader observes that entire unbelievable scene from his corner and realizes his life is in serious danger. In absolute panic, he begins stuffing as many wads of cash as he can inside a large black bag. The mobster desperately considers calling the police, but his thoughts are cut short when he feels the cold metal of a gun press against the back of his neck. The protagonist appears right behind him like a ghost and repeats the same order to delete the recording once more. He calmly warns that this is the mobster's last chance if he does not want to end up tossed on the floor like his henchman. Trembling from head to toe, the man stammers, confirming that he will do exactly what he wants and delete the file right away. He points to the device and says all it takes is removing the hard drive from the reader to destroy it or burn it, however he sees fit. Curious and frightened, the mobster asks why a professional hitman would go to so much trouble over a simple school recording. The protagonist goes silent for a brief moment before responding enigmatically. He looks down at the bloody phone screen on the desk where the recording was being played. He reveals that the blonde-haired person appearing ridiculed in that humiliating footage is none other than himself. The gang leader blinks in confusion, trying to process that extremely bizarre and unexpected piece of information regarding the reason for so much violence. Overcome by a sudden fury, the youth points the gun at the man's face and shouts that they dared to deface his innermost pride. One final gunshot echoes in the room, and a spray of blood splatters violently, covering the luxurious plate of food on the table. The calm of the night returns to the narrow streets of that Korean residential neighborhood after the end of the slaughter. The scene then shifts to a quiet two-story residence, illuminated only by the light of the street lamps inside one of the rooms. Everything is silent and tidy, revealing the typical routine of a high school student. Prominently displayed, the red emblem of the prestigious Anil High School gleams discreetly, stitched onto the pocket of the school blazer. The immaculate school uniform hangs inside the closet, waiting to be worn the next day. However, behind a discreet door in the house, a long and dark concrete staircase descends toward the basement. An old light bulb protected by an iron cage dimly illuminates the damp underground corridor. On a workbench covered in tools and tweezers, a piece of paper stands out with the name Jang Hyun-soo firmly written on it. Beneath the yellowish light of a lamp, the protagonist assembles the parts of a powerful sniper rifle with surgical precision. He screws the suppressor onto the barrel of the weapon, knowing that in a country where firearms are strictly prohibited, he needs to be as silent and discreet as possible. He ponders that under Korean legislation, any weapon he possesses would be considered nothing more than a modified toy. It would be viewed as merely a cheap imitation in the eyes of the local authorities. However, the youth knows very well that every single detail of the weaponry in his hands is extremely dangerous. With a focused and deadly look, he aims through the scope and guarantees that everything right there is absolutely real. Ryu Kang-min starts the conversation by demanding a cigarette with total authority. One of the hurt delinquents quickly hands over the pack of cigarettes without hesitating for a single second. With the cigarette already in his mouth, the prota gestures with his fingers and asks for a lighter. Cheol-min, all bruised up and completely submissive, rushes over to light it for him. Next, the young man asks for an ashtray, making one of the boys use his own hands for it, while Hayan silently laments the loss of her childhood innocence right there in that playground. Not quite understanding what is going on, Hayan asks with crossed arms why they were all gathered in that place. Taking a puff from his cigarette, Ryu Kang-min calmly replies that they need to finish the conversation they started the day before. The young man makes sure to bring up their other friend who never shows up to class because he is repeating the year. He notices an awkward silence take over the group and asks them what is wrong. Ryu Kang-min wants to know why the vibe suddenly got so tense and weird among everyone present. Hayan just looks away with a worried expression and remains completely silent. The prota then breaks the cigarette in half with his hands and asks with a smile if something bad happened to this so-called friend. At that moment, the memory of a chaotic scene full of people knocked out all over the floor of a dark room comes to mind. In the middle of all that trouble is Jang Hyun-soo, the young blonde guy with his face covered in mess. The scene then cuts to a toy shooting gallery where several perfect shots have just been made. Hayan leans on the counter and examines the airgun, confirming that the trigger and the bolt are working perfectly without any issues. She lets out a disappointed sigh while holding the toy pistol in her hands. The girl complains out loud about the terrible calibration of the sight and says she feels like taking the whole thing apart and throwing it in the washing machine. Quite annoyed with the delinquents in the background, she turns around and asks if they think they are in the military to leave the equipment looking like that. She looks at the prize shelf and deeply sighs, wishing she could win that buff plush elephant with a trunk, which is the grand prize. Suddenly, a hand grabs the gun, and she is startled when the young man asks if she really wants that toy. The person appearing there is 20-year-old Jang Hyun-soo, a first-year student who returned to Anil High School. Ha-yeon praises his stance with the pistol, and the young man modestly replies that it is his first time shooting in his life. The precise shot hits one of the targets on the shelf right in the bullseye. Surprised and very excited, she steps closer and asks if he is really going to manage to win that plushie for her. The young man keeps firing several times in a row in an impressive and fast manner, leaving the girl amazed by his accuracy. The delinquents watching the scene are left speechless and joke around, saying that he has the perfect talent that recruiters look for in the armed forces. Jang Hyun-soo gets the maximum score and hands the buff plush elephant over to Ha-yeon. Thrilled with the gift, she approaches the blonde guy and holds his arm, thanking him in a sweet way. Ha-yeon smiles beautifully and promises that she will definitely return the favor somehow. Someday the young man freezes up and is completely left without a reaction to the girl unexpectedly getting so close. Later on, she has fun spinning the plush elephant in the air, while the guys tell her to be careful not to break the toy's trunk. Jang Hyun-soo watches the scene from afar and becomes lost in thought with the toy gun in his hand, trying to understand what she meant by that promise of a reward. He strokes the toy pistol in a very careful and quiet manner. The young man turns bright red with embarrassment and smiles to himself, thinking that all of that happened just because he has a good eye. The story then skips forward to a sunny day near Seongsu subway station. Ha-yeon appears wearing a black leather jacket and looks quite impatient with the current situation. She walks down the sidewalk wondering why Ryu Kang-min would have so much interest in a guy like that since she wanted to forget about him forever. Suddenly, Ryu Kang-min pops up right behind her and asks why she is muttering to herself in the middle of the street. The young man jokes, asking if she lost her mind, but she just turns around annoyed and questions what he is talking about. Looking closely at him, the girl realizes that his clothes are identical to hers, and he jokes, saying it is just a huge coincidence of matching styles. She clicks her tongue, quite bothered, and asks for the real reason he asked her out right in the middle of the weekend. The prota stays silent for a brief moment while staring at her. He then steps closer and asks in a serious tone if she still remembers what they talked about at the cafe. A quick flashback shows the moment when the prota touched her face and reminded her of the agreement that she would do him a simple favor. Ryu Kang-min shows his phone screen and mentions that she had said that neighborhood was the busiest place in Seoul. Based on that, he asks her to guide a small-town guy like him and show him around the city of Seoul. The girl looks down and reflects in silence on such an unusual request coming from someone like him. Ha-yeon thinks this whole situation is a massive joke that makes no sense. She admits to herself that she was terrified he would ask for something dangerous after everything he did. But she decides to hide it, and cheerfully remarks that even the pigeons around there look fancy. Ryu Kang-min looks back a bit confused while walking next to the girl. He asks with a friendly smile if she wants to grab a bite first, making Ha-yeon think he is totally head over heels for her. As they continue walking down the sidewalk, the young man asks if she is craving anything in particular. Ryu Kang-min pulls out his phone, saying he just found an amazing place on social media, without realizing that an unknown camera is pointed right at the two of them. A discreet click captures a close-up photo of the couple, revealing that they are being closely followed by someone hiding behind a wall. A mysterious man dressed all in black watches the couple and keeps taking photos with his phone. They enter a very traditional restaurant, and Ha-yeon recognizes that the place is famous, but she gets a bit suspicious of his choice. Upon seeing the gigantic table with a feast of 80 different dishes, she wonders if they came all the way there just to play royalty. Sitting at the table, the young woman complains, saying that his taste in restaurants is awful, and asks if he has ever been out with a girl before. Her eyes widen in surprise when the young man immediately bows his head and apologizes for the bad choice. Ryu Kang-min sincerely confesses that the truth is, he has never had any real friends in his life. With the meat dishes served on the table, he explains that because of this, he does not have the slightest clue what people usually eat on normal dates. Ha-yeon watches the young man in silence for a few moments. Noticing his unusual shyness, he adds that he does not know how to act on days like this, but he is interrupted by the girl, who drops a piece of meat into his bowl while complaining that his sob story is getting annoying. She tells him to hush up and eat, grumbling that she was on a diet and that he shouldn't have brought her to a place full of temptations like that. As soon as she tastes the food, Ha-yeon is amazed by the incredible flavor, and the young man happily celebrates that she liked it. The prota highly praises an exotic iguana tempura, leaving the girl completely confused about what she just ate. Another camera click goes off from the outside, capturing the exact moment when the young man very gently wipes the corner of her mouth with a napkin. The date continues, and the two decide to check out a very charming themed cafe filled with alpacas. One of the animals lets out a bizarre and scary screech as soon as they step close, while Ha-yeon affectionately feeds a brown alpaca, saying they are gentle creatures. A white alpaca spits water right in Ryu Kang-min's face, who ironically remarks that their cry is certainly unique. The mysterious stalker takes more photos, while the prota complains loudly about that animal's terrible personality. The stalker's phone captures the funny scene of the white alpaca nibbling on the young man's hair, while Ha-yeon laughs her head off at his situation. The day begins to fade, and the two arrive at a modern art gallery displaying a major collaboration for the year 2026. Observing the artwork carefully, the prota comments with a thoughtful air that modern art is incredibly deep. However, the grand piece right in front of them is just a regular restroom urinal, with a sign indicating that it is not art, but rather waste. Ryu Kang-min leans in to look at the object closely and asks if she also feels that profound emotion akin to pressing the flush button, leaving the girl completely lost regarding what he is talking about. Another photo is taken from behind them, while Ha-yeon points out that it is just an exhibition of bathroom products from 2026. At nightfall, they stop in front of a huge, luxurious, and beautifully lit designer brand store. The stalker in black takes advantage of the moment to capture another image of the young woman from behind, looking at the grand display window. Tired of posing so much, she asks with a laugh how long they will have to keep taking photos, and the young man replies that he will only stop when he is satisfied. Ryu Kang-min suddenly mentions that his device's storage is full, leaving her confused since he claims his phone has 1,024 terabytes of space. Another click captures the intimate moment when he leans in to show her the screen, joking that he took enough photos to keep that national treasure of a face on his device forever. The night gets darker and filled with stars over the big city buildings. While walking through a park, the prota thanks her for her company and says he loved the tour around Seoul. He gives a slight smirk and suggests that it would be a waste to head home so early, making her curious about what he plans to do next. Ryu Kang-min points to a shooting game booth with cork guns that offers 10 shots for 5,001. Ha-yeon looks closely at the shooting booth with a serious and focused expression. She locks her eyes directly onto the small, colorful paper targets set up in the distance. At that instant, she recalls the impressive accuracy that Jang Hyun-soo showed when they played together at the arcade in the past. Snapping out of her distant thoughts, she turns her attention back to Ryu Kang-min, who is already setting up with the rifle by her side. The booth owner, a bald man, cheerfully announces that if they land just one shot out of the 10 available, they already win a cute plush animal as a prize. The vendor claims it would be the perfect gift for his girlfriend, but the prota knows very well that winning at this type of game is not that simple. Ryu Kang-min picks up the wooden rifle and immediately notices that the calibration of the sight is completely misaligned on purpose to trick customers. The young man knows that with such an absurd deviation, even an experienced Special Forces soldier would easily miss every single shot. Ha-yeon teases him, saying she can tell just by looking that he won't be able to hit a thing, but he just smiles and proposes a fun wager. He points to the elephant plushies on the shelf and says that if he manages to land every shot and take the prize home for her, things will change completely. Taking aim with a very steady hand, Ryu Kang-min warns that if he wins, she will have to do him one more personal favor, leaving the girl surprised by his persistence. The booth owner closes his eyes with a smirk, confident that the young man is only going to embarrass himself with that completely broken gun. To everyone's absolute surprise, a rapid sequence of perfect shots begins to knock down every single target one after another without missing a single time. The booth owner freezes in pure shock, while Ha-yeon tries to get his attention by quietly raising her finger. Still unable to believe what he saw, the man yells, asking if the young man really managed to hit every target with that broken gun. The owner starts sweating nervously and wonders if the young man is a professional operative in disguise, while Ryu Kang-min turns around holding the toy gun in a casual way and asks if the girl wants to give it a shot, claiming it is his first time with a cork gun. The girl decides to take the rifle to try it out, and the prota guides her to press the weapon firmly against her shoulder, without either of them noticing that the stalker's camera is still active, taking photos of them from a distance. The spy captures a close-up photo at the exact moment the prota steps in to adjust her stance from behind, leaving the girl blushing with embarrassment. The night rolls on, and the scene turns to the front of a dark brick residential building, holding the prize she won at the booth. Ha-yeon complains that the pink plush fish is terribly ugly. She stares at the pink toy thoughtfully and admits that its soft texture is strangely satisfying to squeeze. Shown from the side, the girl walks in silence with her cheeks slightly flushed. Ha-yeon pulls out her phone and stares at the screen while thinking about Ryu Kang-min and the unusual request he made. She remembers the moment he asked her to post the photo of them together on her social media with date hashtags, and notices that the post is already flooded with likes. The young woman lets out a deep sigh as she thinks about everything that happened throughout the day. Stepping into the elevator to go up to the second floor, she keeps reflecting on how he used the excuse of wanting to see the city to pull off that obvious move to get close to her. She recalls the photos taken, the silly smiles, and the sweet moment when he wiped her mouth with all the gentleness in the world at the restaurant. Hayan wonders if he really believed that taking cute photos and giving that friendly good guy smile would make her fall for him. Amidst these confusing thoughts, she ends up squeezing the pink plushie tightly against her chest. She hides her blushing face in the toy and mutters to herself that he is an extremely annoying person. Meanwhile, in some dark place, a mysterious hand slides across a phone screen, viewing the photo where the two appear very close at the restaurant. The person keeps scrolling through the feed and closely observes the photo of the couple taken at the art museum. The phone screen displays the photo where the two appear from the side, almost touching each other. Suddenly, the elevator chime announces the arrival at the 5th floor, interrupting the spy's phone browsing. The elevator door opens slowly, and Hayan waits to step out, with the spy's phone screen still displaying the photo of the couple just below. As soon as she takes her first step out, the girl freezes in absolute shock at what she sees right in front of her standing before her, with an expression of pure rage and resentment, is the dreaded Jang Hyun-soo. The narrow and dark hallway of the residential building goes completely silent. The pink plush fish she was carrying drops to the cold floor right next to her feet. Jang Hyun-soo stares at her coldly and says in a threatening tone that it is dangerous for a girl to be out on the streets this late and that she should head home earlier. Before she can react or ask what he is doing there, he lunges forward quickly and grabs her by the neck with force, making her gasp in pain. The young man drags her inside the dark apartment and remarks that this place brings back a lot of memories from the past. Holding her against the wall with violence, he says that this is the first time he has returned there since that fateful night. The memory of that night shows the group of delinquents gathered in her living room, happily drinking and raising their glasses in celebration. Everyone is clinking their drinks together, happy and relaxed amidst the mess on the rug. One of the boys jokes around, saying the drink is so sweet it tastes like juice, while the other tells him to stop talking nonsense. Ha-yan, sitting in the corner, sharply warns them to drink in moderation and threatens to deal with anyone who dares to make a mess in her house. The delinquents keep shouting and downing their glasses, but Jang Hyun-soo tells her not to worry, as he promises he will keep an eye on the group so that nothing gets out of hand. Appreciative of the help, the young woman remarks with a smile that he seems like someone quite reliable, probably because he is a bit older than the others. The young man smiles back gently and tells her to just trust him completely. The memory shows a single lonely bottle left on the living room floor. As the night went on, several other empty bottles began piling up in the dark corners of the apartment. In the end, all the delinquents ended up completely passed out on the living room floor from drinking so much. Hayan also ended up falling fast asleep on the apartment couch, not suspecting a single thing. In the dim light of the room, a silent figure began to slowly approach the girl's sleeping body. Jang Hyun-soo reached his hand out toward her and whispered her name in a dark way in the middle of the shadows. He leaned over the couch and asked in a low voice if she was really asleep. He stood there watching the defenseless young woman sleep, without any chance of her reacting. With a completely disturbed and locked gaze, he whispered repeatedly to make sure she would not wake up under any circumstances. However, the quietness of that night was shattered by a desperate scream of panic that echoed throughout the whole residential building. Back in the present, the aggressor in the jacket stands up and yells with hatred that she ruined his life by having the nerve to report him to the police back then. The young man complains with his head down that because of that report, he ended up getting expelled from school and was completely abandoned by his own family. Fallen on the kitchen floor and coughing nonstop from the choking, Hayan tries to argue desperately and asks how that could possibly be her fault. Hayan looks at him with the deepest scorn and calls him a terrible predator. Jang Hyun-soo blinks in shock at her reaction, seemingly unable to grasp the severity of his own past actions. He reacts with extreme outrage and yells that she was the one who took the first step in their relationship back in school. The aggressor starts recalling the moments and claims that she started it with accidental touches, promising to return the favor and flirting openly with him. He rants, remembering that she wouldn't stop calling him an older brother figure and saying how reliable he seemed. Holding his phone, Jang Hyun-soo claims with hatred that she was the only one interested at first and that she kept acting like a fake, innocent person. He points the device's screen in her direction and says that today the situation is no different from how it used to be. The intruder shows the recent social media post where she appears next to another guy on a date. With an extremely twisted smile, the young blonde guy claims that she made that post just to try and make him jealous. Faced with such madness, Ha-yeon stares at him horrified while he keeps talking nonstop in an obsessive manner. Jang Hyun-soo points at the photo and says she made sure to go to the exact same shooting game that the two of them used to play together. Unable to stand listening to that absurd delusion anymore, the girl clenches her fist with all her might. With a swift and precise strike, she delivers a violent slap to his face and yells that the more he talks, the more he sounds like a complete psychopath. With the young man still dizzy from the blow, she keeps insulting the aggressor and claims that he has completely lost his mind and sanity. Out of control, the blonde guy pulls out a real weapon and fires twice, destroying the pink plushie on the floor, while Ha-yeon screams in terror and tells that lunatic to go find help once and for all. With a bizarre and dark look, the young blonde guy reveals that since that fateful day, he started recording himself non-stop. He points the loaded pistol toward her face and shares that he had been training exhaustively every single day, just waiting for the moment of their reunion. He steps closer and strokes her tear-stained face, commenting that the time has finally come to show the results of his dark training. Jang Hyun-soo breaks into a wide and terrifying smile, shaking with excitement and confessing that he is extremely nervous about this moment. Ha-yeon lets out a desperate cry for help upon realizing the wicked intentions of that monster inside her apartment. Suddenly, a gloved hand emerges from the darkness and covers the girl's mouth. Out of nowhere. Ryu Kang-min appears, silencing the young woman, and remarks mockingly that he didn't expect the blonde guy to show up so quickly. With a sarcastic smile, the prota reveals that sending those fake paparazzi was completely worth it to draw the target out once and for all. Meanwhile, in a dark and dirty alley filled with trash bags behind the residential building, the night remains quiet. The fake spies, who are actually the gang of delinquents wearing black hoodies, look at their own phones, not fully understanding the plan. The guys show their phone screens with the photos taken in secret and confirm that they sent and posted every image they managed to capture from a distance. Cheol-min pulls off his beanie, cursing at the prota for making them go through such a ridiculous situation. The gang leader complains indignantly that, on top of being humiliated at the cafe, now they are forced to do this kind of embarrassing task for their rival. He remembers Ryu Kang-min's express order to take photos where they looked like a real couple and post them online, and hopes the plan works out so they don't get a beating from him again. Scratching his head in confusion, the bully admits he can't understand the guy's intentions, since he doesn't even seem to truly like the girl. He stares at the dark front of the apartment building and wonders what the real goal is behind all that theater set up by the prota. Inside the apartment, the prota finally faces the target and says he was having serious trouble finding him since his recent disappearance. He calmly walks past the girl on the floor and comments that he can hardly believe such a childish trap worked perfectly to lure the blonde guy in. Ryu Kang-min adjusts his gloves and asks with disdain if the young man was really that desperate to fall for something so obvious. Jang Hyun-soo listens to the taunts in silence with a tense facial expression and his eyes locked on his rival. The intruder asks angrily if the newcomer is the girl's boyfriend, but the prota fires back ironically, asking if he looks like her boyfriend by any chance. The blonde guy begins getting ready to shoot, but the prota remains completely relaxed and lets out a sigh without showing an ounce of fear. With an expression of pure mockery, the criminal says he understands the situation and decides to finish off the intruder once and for all. A violent shot is fired toward the prota, who dodges the projectile with extreme agility in the blink of an eye. Ryu Kang-min dodges the shot easily and thinks to himself that the blonde guy is truly dangerous for attacking directly without giving any kind of warning. Jang Hyun-soo points the pistol again and yells that as soon as he eliminates his rival, the girl will finally be his forever. With movements as fast as lightning, the prota advances and firmly grabs his opponent's armed hand. Ryu Kang-min disarms his adversary with ease and asks with disdain if he really wishes that much to be with the girl once and for all. A tense silence returns to the dark apartment kitchen for a few brief moments. The prota then proposes an unusual wager through a shooting match, where the winner would take the girl as the ultimate prize. Ryu Kang-min pulls out his own pistol and mentions that, for the game to be fair, he needs to make one detail clear about his actual hardware. He points the weapon coldly at his opponent with a confident smile and warns that his pistol finishes the job with just a single shot. The scene cuts to a phone recording titled as Camera Test Number 17, showing the shirtless blonde guy with a surprised expression upon realizing he was being recorded in secret in a panic over the leak of the private video. Jang Hyun-soo curses up a storm trying to find out who released the file, though he admits the angle made him look quite attractive in the footage. Wearing nothing but a bathrobe, he suspects that the person responsible for the leak was the phone repair technician and complains bitterly about choosing such a cheap service. Still in his bathrobe, Jang Hyun-soo swears with hatred through his phone that he is going to put a round directly into the head of the person to blame for the leak. But a mysterious voice coming from behind warns him that he still doesn't know the whole truth. Sitting calmly in a chair and holding a real weapon, a man in a suit and glasses mockingly remarks that the blonde guy's private video has already become quite famous out there. Startled, the blonde guy demands to know who he is and what he wants. While the stranger comments that the controversial recording is blowing up even on internet forums, the man explains in a mocking tone that the recorded video showed the blonde guy correcting his own movements and rehearsing alone in front of a phone camera just to try and charm girls into bed. Jang Hyun-soo is left in total shock upon seeing that the man found out about his entire recording setup that he used hidden away in his own bedroom. The man in the suit lets out a slight smirk and comments that recording oneself to evaluate one's own performance in bed is something extremely bizarre and twisted to do. The stranger raises his weapon calmly and adds that seeing the young man with such a dangerous object in his hands caught his attention right from the start. He analyzes the hardware and says the blonde guy has the perfect talent to create true social chaos and become a massive headline problem. Fixing his cold eyes behind the lenses of his glasses, the man calls out the young man in an intimidating way. Running out of patience for beating around the bush, Jang Hyun-soo grabs him furiously by the collar and demands that he answer right away who he thinks he is to invade his privacy. Silence takes over the messy bedroom, where the recording tripods remain set up around the unmade bed in the shadows. The man in the suit reveals the shiny crest on his jacket and introduces himself as a member of a secret group called the Network. He explains that the Network is a highly profitable organization that operates in the shadows and moves a lot of cash, cocking the real pistol with a metallic click. He reveals that his job there is precisely to recruit problematic talents, like the blonde guy Jang Hyun-soo listens in shock as the man shares that he observed with immense interest all of his controversial actions, capable of causing public outcry. The recruiter flashes a sinister smile and makes the final invitation for the young man to start working along with his organization. From then on, back in the present, in the dark apartment kitchen, Ryu Kang-min repeats the question, wanting to know if the blonde guy really wants to be with Hayan that badly. He insists on the proposal to hold a shooting match to decide who will take the girl as the final prize of the wager. The prota points his own pistol and makes sure to reinforce the rules of the game they are about to play. He stares at his rival in a dark way and warns with all the coldness in the world that his weapon will take him out with a single precise shot. Faced with a real threat, the blonde guy hesitates for an instant and remains completely silent before his opponent Ryu Kang-min cracks a slight smirk and asks if he suddenly ran out of words from the pressure of the match. Overcome by hatred and despair, Jang Hyun-soo screams, telling the prota to fire once and for all while the gun remains pressed against his forehead. The prota taunts him, asking if he got scared now that the moment of truth has arrived to pull the trigger of his weapon. With a cold whisper, the young man says bang and pulls the trigger, firing point blank against his opponent's forehead in a swift movement. The blonde guy is thrown backward with violence and crashes heavily onto the floor, letting out a deafening shriek of pain. Jang Hyun-soo rolls around on the floor holding his head in absolute panic, while Ryu Kang-min checks his own weapon, finding that painful reaction very strange. Upon opening the cylinder of the hardware, the prota is surprised to realize that the pistol was loaded only with rubber rounds. The blonde guy looks at his own trembling hands on his forehead and grumbles that the delivery box guaranteed they were real rounds, realizing he was ripped off by the smuggler Ryu Kang-min sighs and mutters that he already suspected that wasn't a real firearm right from the start of the clash. Still down, Jang Hyun-soo discreetly slips his hand inside his black leather jacket in a big hurry. He gets on his knees, grinding his teeth in anger, and rants to himself about how terribly humiliating this situation is turning out to be for him. Suddenly, a real and deafening shot echoes through the apartment, forcing the prota to quickly dodge with an agile leap to the side. The prota recovers, startled to notice that the blonde guy has indeed pulled out a second, real pistol. This time, fully loaded Jang Hyun-soo fires non-stop into the darkness, while the prota performs fast acrobatics across the floor to escape the deadly projectiles. Ryu Kang-min observes the shots from afar and wonders if the first gun was just a decoy to hide the actual high-end hardware. The real shot hits a toy robot on the shelf, blasting it to tiny pieces, and the prota comments that kids definitely shouldn't play with such dangerous things. With the still smoking gun pointed at his own head in a gesture of insane mockery, the blonde guy smirks and says, anyone could see that pistol is the work of a professional, asking if he modified it himself. He keeps firing furiously, telling his opponent to shut up and drop dead, while Ryu Kangmin dodges, impressed to note that even the calibration of that weapon's sight is a true work of art. The blonde guy curses, annoyed at being unable to hit him no matter what, while the prota concludes in his thoughts, analyzing the number of offenses committed with that high-end pistol. He finds it extremely intriguing that a criminal with such a heavy history of violence involving that weapon has never spent a single day in jail. The prota sports a discreet and challenging smile on the corner of his lips right in the middle of the tense combat. He demands that the blonde guy reveal right away who the powerful group is that is giving him cover to act freely under the codename of the network. In reality, it is a mysterious and highly dangerous syndicate kept under absolute secrecy by the country's authorities. The criminal group recruits problematic students scattered across the whole country to act in a coordinated manner as an organization based on independent cells. This fragmented structure of isolated small groups makes the work of investigation and mapping extremely complex for detectives. This peculiar operational model makes discovering the true leadership of the faction a practically impossible task for conventional police. However, with his eyes fixed and focused on the mission, the prota knows very well that he needs to track down and dismantle every single one of them to the bitter end, on a green gaming table. Alongside a passport and a first-class plane ticket from Korea to the Philippines, rests a folder with classified files on the Bathala organization. The confidential file features a special note highlighting that the investigation into the network group is still under strict verification, because the true danger lies precisely in what hides behind that criminal organization. The prota recalls that the mysterious syndicate is his primary target and that he received express orders to eliminate everyone involved in the organization. With fast and precise steps, the young man dodges across the room, while his opponent mockingly asks why he is daydreaming like that. Right in the middle of the fight, Jang Hyun-soo steps closer, pointing the gun right near his face, and questions if he looks like a joke by any chance. Not knowing that this blonde guy is actually a member investigated by the prota, the two keep exchanging rapid attacks, while the prota recalls in his thoughts that he discovered this guy's connection to the network through his previous investigations. The blonde guy yells furiously that his rival is a crazy person who stole his girl, without imagining that he is being used merely as a stepping stone for the prota to reach the boss of the syndicate. The opponent tries to land a violent blow while complaining that he is being mocked and threatened, not realizing he is just the first step in the operative's mission. Ryu Kangmin masterfully dodges the blonde guy's attack, which ends up hitting a dish rack in the back of the kitchen. Upon hearing the pots and plates crashing down and making a thunderous noise in the kitchen, the young man just observes the situation with coldness. The blonde guy points the pistol and fires once more in a desperate attempt to hit the target in the darkness. Jang Hyun-soo flashes a sadistic smile and claims with all the certainty in the world that the end of the line has arrived for the intruder. However, to the aggressor's surprise, the prota quickly pops back up, pointing his own weapon in his direction. A rapid sequence of shots hits the blonde guy's face, who lets out a sharp cry of pain upon being struck full-on by the rubber pellets. With his face all bruised and full of dark marks caused by the impacts, the aggressor groans in pain on the kitchen floor. Ryu Kangmin then points the pistol to the side and fires one more precise shot right in the middle of the apartment. The shot completely destroys the tablet that was lying on the floor, which contained the criminal's secret recordings. The prota calmly walks over to the fridge, grabs a can of soda, and asks if the young man really intends to keep up with all that nonsense. He opens the soda can right in front of the fallen opponent and calls him a criminal delinquent with total contempt. The young man calmly takes a sip of soda, while the blonde guy tries to justify himself from the floor, saying that he is not the one to blame for all of that. Jang Hyun-soo insists, with a shaky and pathetic voice, that he is not the bad guy in this whole story of obsession. The scene shows the dark apartment window at night, recalling the blonde guy's unhealthy obsession in his own bedroom in the past. In the memory, the young man appears isolated in his dark bedroom, crouched in a corner and staring fixedly at his phone screen, waiting for a message from Ha-yeon. The screen shows dozens of ignored messages where he begged for a reply or a voice call, asking desperately if she was ignoring him. Completely disturbed by her silence, he convinced himself that all of that was a tremendous injustice against his feelings. The blonde guy recalls with bitterness the day she smiled and held his arm in a sweet way at the school arcade. He squeezes his own arm tightly, remembering that she had thought it was amazing how good his aim was with toy guns. The young man started training tirelessly, locked in his room surrounded by boxes of toy weapons, just to impress her again. He vents with his back turned, saying he considers himself merely a misunderstood victim who ended up betrayed by the person he loved most in the world. Taking another sip of his soda, Ryu Kangmin listens to that twisted rant with a bored look and comments that it is indeed a very innovative perspective on the situation. The blonde guy keeps grumbling about love, leaving the prota quite confused while Hayan remains huddled and scared in the corner of the kitchen. The aggressor gets up with his pistol drawn, points it in their direction, and yells in tears that he truly loves her for real. Ryu Kangmin just stares at him while drinking from his can, listening to the young man yell that his love for her is not a lie and that it is something totally genuine on his part. Hayan hugs her own knees on the floor, showing the deepest exhaustion and disgust upon hearing that sick declaration from the aggressor. She closes her eyes with sadness while the aggressor repeats that he is completely crazy and obsessed with her. Desperate and with tears streaming down his face, Jang Hyun-soo points the weapon upward and yells that he loves her with every piece of his soul. He prepares to pull the trigger again and claims that if he can't have her for himself no matter what in this lifetime. The young man turns the pistol in her direction and rants that then nobody else will have her, putting the prota on high alert with the threat. The sight of the gun is aimed directly at the head of Hayan, who awaits the worst. Without the strength to flee that apartment, Ryu Kangmin is startled by the young man's madness and tries to yell at him to stop, while the blonde guy decides to end it all at once, thinking he has already ruined his life anyway. Crying in a manic way, the young man points the gun and proposes that the two of them get married in the next life before pulling the final trigger. A brutal sequence of shots with real weapons begins to echo throughout the whole dark apartment. Several muzzle flashes light up the kitchen while the projectiles fly in all directions in a desperate manner. The shots blast through the apartment window, shattering the glass into dozens of pieces that fall into the darkness of the night outside. Other projectiles hit the walls and furniture, leaving deep marks of destruction all over the apartment's living room. Several empty shell casings hit the floor noisily with the end of the frantic shooting. Out of breath and with both weapons drawn, the blonde guy reloads his hardware while smoke rises from the hot barrels. Jang Hyun-soo breathes heavily and tiredly, trying to see the result of his furious attack through the gray smoke. However, the prota's calm voice echoes in the room, commenting that home appliances manufactured in Korea truly are of excellent quality. He appears hidden behind a large gray refrigerator serving as a shield for Hayan, praising the fact that the appliance is tough enough to stop real shots. Protected under the prota's arms, the young woman sighs in relief upon realizing she came out unharmed from that deadly fit of rage from the blonde guy Ryu Kangmin, peeks from the corner of the bullet-marked fridge and glares at the blonde guy, who asks horrified who on earth he really is to be able to do all that. Jang Hyun-soo is indignant, asking why Ryu Kangmin risked himself in the middle of so many shots just to save a girl. Jang Hyun-soo remains silent for a moment, completely in disbelief at what he just witnessed. Jang Hyun-soo begins to suspect that maybe there is a much bigger reason behind all of that. Choi Hayan becomes apprehensive, quietly hoping that her worst fears are not true. Jang Hyun-soo looks around and begins to imagine that the two of them were having some sort of close relationship. Before he broke into the place, Jang Hyun-soo makes a bizarre grimace of pure hatred and despair. Refusing to accept that possibility, Ryu Kangmin taunts his rival, asking if he really wants to know the truth about the two of them. Ryu Kangmin steps even closer to Choi Ha-yeon and pretends to be embarrassed to admit what was going on there. Jang Hyun-soo completely loses his head at the provocation and charges forward furiously, shouting insults he tries to shoot, yelling that he is going to finish them off. But a swift attack cuts his words short and destroys his weapon. Jang Hyun-soo freezes in shock upon seeing the pieces of his pistol flying through the air. He can't even comprehend what just happened because the prota's movement was so blindingly fast. Suddenly, several drops of blood begin to fall to the floor right onto his sneaker. Jang Hyun-soo begins to scream in pain upon realizing that his own finger was severed in the attack. Ryu Kangmin mockingly tells him to take it easy, saying not to yell so the neighbors don't hear. The prota threatens to take his entire hand off from the wrist down if he doesn't shut his mouth immediately. Ryu Kangmin then picks up the remaining weapon and coldly describes that it is a 9mm Glock pistol. Jang Hyun-soo breaks into a cold sweat while listening to Ryu Kangmin warn that things are about to get serious. Ryu Kangmin points the pistol directly at his rival's head and warns that the next shot will be with a reel. Round Jang Hyun-soo backs away, trembling and terrified, repeating to himself the threat of the reel round. Staring down the barrel of the gun right in front of him, he stammers, saying he doesn't want to lose his life there. The sound of the pistol being cocked echoes through the room in a chilling way. Overcome by absolute panic, Jang Hyun-soo turns around and flees desperately from the apartment. Ryu Kangmin watches the escape and grumbles that the blonde guy finally made the decision to run. Silence finally returns to the apartment now that the aggressor is gone for good. He remarks to himself that his rival should have tried to escape a lot sooner. The scene cuts to the busy and brightly lit streets of the city during the night. Amidst the movement on the sidewalks, a pink sign for a maid cafe catches the attention of pedestrians. A girl dressed as a maid with cat ears tries to attract customers by making cute poses. Jang Hyun-soo dashes past her in a major hurry, totally ignoring the attempt to get close. In the middle of his rush, he pushes the girl irritably while she lets out a startled sound from the bump. He grumbles in anger, unable to stand that chase that seems to have no end. His feet keep moving rapidly across the asphalt as he tries to outrun the danger. Suddenly, he notices with horror that the prota is right behind him, keeping up with every single step. Upon stopping at a crowded intersection, he begins to despair, wondering what he did wrong to deserve this Jang Hyun-soo screams in the middle of the busy street, questioning the reason for all that misfortune in his life. He tries to play the victim to the people around, yelling that he was just used by a girl with tears streaming down his face. He laments out loud for being the only one getting the short end of the stick in this whole deal. Ryu Kang-min calmly catches up to him while messing with his phone, and ironically remarks that his rival still has plenty of energy to yell. He looks up toward a huge billboard screen on top of a building and comments that they got there faster than expected. The prota selects the option to mirror his phone screen directly onto the large electronic panel on the street. Jang Hyun-soo tries to continue his escape by crossing the crosswalk, not realizing what is about to happen. Suddenly, the ad on the billboard is replaced by the recording of the blonde guy himself crying in a humiliating way. He stops immediately upon noticing a strange light coming from above and looks at the billboard in terror. The people on the street also begin to stop and point at the billboard. Confused by that sudden broadcast, pedestrians start gossiping and laughing at the ridiculous image exposed on the electronic panel for the whole city. To see Jang Hyun-soo freezes in embarrassment while listening to the mocking comments that it looks way too small. He tries to cover himself desperately upon realizing that everyone is staring at the private parts in his video. Totally humiliated, the young man screams in despair, trying to defend himself and claiming that the size is not small. He keeps yelling to the crowd that that day had been just an exception, while Ryu Kang-min watches him from the other side of the street with total contempt. Ryu Kang-min lets out a mocking laugh, making Jang Hyun-soo realize with horror that he was the one who put that video on the billboard. He points tremblingly at the prota's phone and asks if he was truly the one responsible for all that humiliation. At that moment, the pedestrian signal begins to blink, indicating that the crossing time is almost up. The traffic light finally turns red for pedestrians, stopping the crossing on the avenue. Blinded by fury, Jang Hyun-soo charges toward the prota, screaming desperately for him to take the video down immediately. However, before even taking another step, he is struck violently right in the middle of the intersection. A large truck passes at high speed down the avenue and throws the young man far across the crosswalk. The people around are left completely shocked and horrified by the severity of that sudden accident. On the giant billboard, the humiliating video of the blonde guy keeps being displayed for everyone to watch. Jang Hyun-soo lies motionless on the wet asphalt, raising the doubt of whether he survived that terrible impact. Panic takes over the crowd on the sidewalk, while several people scream in fear, thinking the young man lost his life. Ryu Kang-min observes that entire chaotic scene from afar and grumbles that an accident of that gravity was not in his initial plans. Even so, he doesn't seem very shaken by the situation and decides to deal with the consequences in a cold manner. While several people scream desperately to call emergency services, the prota just thinks to himself that his rival met the end he deserved. The scene cuts to the following day in the sunny courtyard of Anil High School. Throughout the school hallways, the main topic among the students is about what happened the previous night. One of the students remarks in surprise that troublemaker Jang Hyun-soo ended up getting hit by a truck sitting in the back of the classroom. Cheolmin confirms the news, saying he already saw all the talk about the case spread across social media. He shows his phone screen with the leaked video and comments that his rival became a national joke and must have his mental state totally destroyed. The other boys start laughing, mocking the situation, commenting ironically that their school finally got a famous celebrity from the other side of the room. Choi Ha-yeon listens to that idle gossip and thinks to herself that the reality of the story is completely the opposite of what they think. She feels quite annoyed and unlucky that freak broke into her house on the exact same day he ended up getting hit by a vehicle. On top of all the anger, the young woman complains about a terrible headache that makes her temples throb non-stop. She tries to remember the details of the previous night, but realizes her memory is completely blank, leaving nothing but a blur from the moment the aggressor invaded her apartment. The last clear memory that Choi Ha-yeon has is of screaming in despair before supposedly blacking out completely. However, she still feels like she can hear deep down in her mind the voice of Ryu Kang-min saying that Korean appliances are the best. She tries to understand why she remembers him commenting about the fridge being tough enough to stop real rounds. While she gets lost in her thoughts, a mysterious dark silhouette emerges before the prota in an alley. The mysterious man remains standing in the shadows, watching the prota with an extremely serious and calm stance. Ryu Kang-min notices the stranger's presence and lets out a confused grunt upon being approached so suddenly. The mysterious man takes a few steps forward, stepping out of the darkness, and calmly asks if the prota is already wide awake. He adjusts the jacket of his elegant suit and comments that, although the scene of the incident is a total mess, the young man doesn't need to worry about a thing. The man in glasses flashes a calm smile and reveals that his team is already taking care of the complete cleanup of Choi Ha-yeon's apartment. He displays a cloth in his hands in a rather threatening manner, while warning that they are also going to get rid of other things. The mysterious operative makes it clear that the cleanup includes wiping Choi Ha-yeon's memories so that no clues about what happened are revealed. Back in the classroom, the girl remains leaning on her desk, feeling that something very strange really happened to her head. The scene returns to the dark alley, lit by an old street lamp in the middle of the night. Ryu Kang-min walks calmly along the asphalt, holding a plastic bag with his groceries after a long day of trouble. He lets out a heavy sigh of irritation upon realizing that there isn't even a single convenience store nearby that sells cigarettes. He complains a lot about his disguise forcing him to be only 17 years old, thinking he should have insisted on creating an identity of 24 years old with his military service already completed. The young man grumbles that he will have to spend 3 long years without being able to smoke, and that in the future he would still be forced to enlist in the actual military. Suddenly, a male voice emerges amidst the silence of the alley, greeting the prota from behind. The same mysterious man in the dark suit appears in the middle of the alley and calls him directly by his real name of Ryu Kang-min. The prota treats the situation with irony, commenting that it is very weird for a fellow with such a suspicious appearance to come approach a mere high school student in the middle of the night. The mysterious man apologizes in case he caused any discomfort and places his hand into the inner pocket of his dark jacket. He flashes a friendly smile while praising the prota for the spectacular system breach that resulted in the video broadcast on the city billboard the previous night. The fellow extends his hand to deliver a black card and reveals that he is part of a secret criminal organization called the Network Ryu Kang-min, stares at the mysterious symbol stamped on the card, and realizes that things happened exactly at the moment he planned. That entire stunt with the video exposed in the middle of the city was the perfect plan drawn up by the prota to finally draw the attention of the network. By using the case of one of the syndicate's own members to cause a public scandal, the elite operative managed to make the criminals bite the bait perfectly. The prota's plan was quite simple, because he knew that as soon as the humiliating video went viral on the internet, the criminal organization would act immediately. Ryu Kang-min was certain that the criminals would come after him. Since they are always on the lookout for talents capable of drawing attention and creating trouble, he smiles with disdain and comments that he truly has a natural knack for this type of situation, knowing that his real plan is only just beginning now. The traditional method would require the prota to infiltrate little by little into one of the several branches of the network. He would have to start from the bottom as a mere unimportant member and slowly work his way up the ranks. It would be necessary to go step by step to earn the trust of the higher-ups and reach the top levels. However, in a group structured in such a closed manner, anyone who works recruiting new members must absolutely be in a prominent position. This means that the recruiter right in front of him likely has direct contact or is very close to the boss of the organization. The prota suddenly shoves the plastic bag against the recruiter and coldly tells him to lead the way right now. He presses the pistol that was hidden inside the bag against the man's chest and demands to be taken directly to where the boss is hiding. The scene cuts to a luxurious room with sliding doors of traditional wooden style inside the room. There are beautiful flower arrangements decorating the living area in an elegant way. A beautiful blonde woman wearing black lingerie appears calmly tending to her plants using pruning shears. She suddenly hesitates and stops mid-cut as she holds a red hibiscus flower. The woman suspects something and discreetly glances toward the room's window. She turns her face in a quick and alert manner. Noticing an unexpected presence there, Ryu Kang-min appears sitting calmly on the sill of the open window next to a travel suitcase. The woman complains about the sudden intrusion and points at the young man in an authoritative manner. Putting her surprise aside, she focuses on what really matters and decides to get straight to the point with the visitor. She slams the gardening shears onto the table with force to show her displeasure. In an extremely fast and lethal manner, the blonde throws the sharp shears toward the young man's face. The The object cuts through the air at high speed, flying directly to strike the prota. Without showing any effort, Ryu Kang-min blocks the attack easily, using a blue passport right in front of his face. The woman sits back down on the luxurious living room couch, while the young man approaches in a casual manner. He approaches from behind and hands the shears directly back into her hand, mockingly commenting that the situation is regrettable. She stares at him with suspicion and questions the reason for his unexpected visit. On top of the table, the freshly cut red flowers remain decorating the luxurious spot. Ryu Kang-min tosses the passport into the air in a casual way before letting it drop onto the table. The document falls before the woman, revealing the new fake identity that the organization had prepared for him. The page shows his photo in a school uniform and the name of Ryu Kang-min officially registered. He leans close to the blonde's ear and whispers that the fake identity they gave him came along with a rather peculiar bonus. A butterfly with greenish wings lands softly upon the yellow orchids in the room. The insect flies in a silent and calm manner across the high ceiling of the luxurious apartment. Ryu Kang-min completely drops his playful tone and assumes an extremely serious expression when speaking of his new targets. He recalls his past in the United States and the secret investigations he had been conducting since that time. The prota focuses on a specific Korean citizen who ended up becoming the key piece of that entire criminal intrigue, holding a red rose with his mouth. He keeps explaining his steps and his findings to the blonde. The woman extends her arm to the side and slowly opens a wooden drawer of her dresser. She removes some important documents from there and hands them back directly into the prota's hands. Ryu Kang-min receives the papers and is quite surprised by the classified information he just read. The page bears the Bathala logo and officially confirms that the network is operating in a criminal manner within the territory of South Korea. The detailed report displays a map of the country and confidential photos showing the activities and hidden branches of the organization. The document also gathers data regarding Ryu Kang-min's infiltration into Anil High School and his recent clash with the local criminals. He lowers the sheets thoughtfully, grumbling that it is still too early to celebrate or jump to hasty conclusions. The blonde picks up one of the thorny roses back, holding the stem with plenty of firmness. She brings the flower close to her face to catch its soft scent and warns that the young man must take great care in his next actions. The scene cuts back to the dark alley lit by the street lamp where Ryu Kang-min and the recruiter were talking. The recruiter begins breaking into a cold sweat and shaking with fear upon feeling the pistol wrapped in plastic pressing against his chest. The prota cracks a friendly smirk but keeps the gun barrel steady to show he isn't playing around. The man in the suit sees no other way out but to accept Ryu Kang-min's conditions, agreeing to guide him in silence through the darkness of the night. The recruiter tries to keep a steady posture, but it is clear that he was quite shaken by being cornered like that. Ryu Kang-min gives a teasing smile and mocks the panicked reaction of the man in glasses. Suddenly, the man tries to make a swift move to disarm the prota, but ends up caught off guard by an immediate counterattack. His eyes widen in complete despair upon realizing he was surpassed in speed by the young man. The recruiter lets out a gasp of surprise and tries to understand how his opponent was so agile. He pats down his own clothes, surprised at not being seriously hurt in the confrontation. Ryu Kang-min displays the pistol with the orange tip and reveals that, in truth, he was just using a toy gun the whole time. He taps the toy against his own temple and laughs at the recruiter's blank face for falling for such a simple bluff. The prota's gaze turns extremely cold and intimidating immediately after. The man in glasses lets out a light chuckle, apparently relieved not to be under the barrel of an actual lethal weapon. However, he soon draws a real pistol and holds it with plenty of firmness to regain control of the situation. The recruiter points the barrel of the gun in the young man's direction and warns that things will now be settled his way. The dark alley remains in absolute silence, while the tension between the two increases by the second. Ryu Kang-min observes the man's movements carefully, staying totally calm, even faced with a deadly threat. The man in the suit takes a firm step forward on the wet asphalt, stepping even closer to the prota. He casts a sharp glance over his shoulder, evaluating Ryu Kang-min's reactions. The man focuses his attention on the details, trying to decode what is passing through the mind of his dangerous companion. The prota suddenly brings his hand to his own ear in a confused way, appearing to hear something unexpected. He agrees out loud with the instruction received through his earpiece and realizes that things ended up shifting direction quite quickly. The street lamp light dimly illuminates the quiet street. While the conversation between the two goes on viewed from above, the two men look like just two acquaintances chatting in a friendly way in the middle of the dark path. Ryu Kang-min observes his opponent's back with suspicion, trying to anticipate what his next move will be. the man in the suit gets extremely startled upon realizing that Ryu Kang-min had real weapons tucked into his waist the entire time and only used the toy to mess with his head. The prota maintains an apathetic and cold look, knowing very well that he controlled the whole situation right from the start. The scene highlights the small silver pin with the network symbol that the recruiter proudly displays on his jacket. The recruiter turns around and begins to guide the young man out of the alley, knowing he cannot underestimate that kid in any way. The scene cuts to the interior of a dark apartment with traditional Asian decorations on the wall. The room is silent and surrounded by computer screens turned on in the darkness of the night. Inside the closet, the Anil high school uniform is perfectly hung up and illuminated by a slit of light. A mysterious message on the screen confirms that the first official contact with the network was finally established with success by the prota. The tactical laptop displays audio frequency graphs and classified data regarding the rival organization's secret transmissions. On another hidden wall, a massive arsenal of state-of-the-art pistols and rifles is stored and ready to be used on the mission. Several mannequins with firefighter, police, and pilot uniforms appear lined up to serve as the perfect disguise for any occasion. The corkboard is filled with photos, maps, and documents connected by red strings to track the enemy's steps. Ryu Kang-min appears from behind, working with focus in front of his large investigation board in the dead of night. He calmly begins to unwrap the foil of a chocolate egg to see what is inside. The young man holds the treat carefully and cracks a slight smile before opening the surprise that comes in its interior. The instruction leaflet reveals a small collectible toy figure, wearing a jacket identical to that of his blonde opponent. Inside the chocolate egg, a colorful plastic capsule appears, holding the true reward of that surprise. The blonde appears doing physical exercises in her training room with sweat trickling down her neck. She performs a complex stretch on the floor with total flexibility and focus. The spacious traditional wooden hall is illuminated by sunlight while she trains in a silent and calm manner. The blonde breathes heavily and tiredly from the repetitive effort of her exercise routine. The spacious and airy environment brings a sense of peace and perfect isolation from the outside world. She stares into space with seriousness, keeping her mind focused and without getting distracted by the problems outside. The image of the recruiter in glasses resurfaces in front of his organization's symbol, indicating that new dangers are approaching. She keeps moving in a graceful and precise way, showing the absolute control she possesses over her own body. Suddenly, she hears a chime coming directly from her earpiece in her left ear and changes expression. The new information received indicates that the secret investigation into the network is advancing faster than planned. The large subway network map connected by red lines begins to reveal the hidden connections of the criminals throughout the entire city. At the top of the investigation, a photo with the dark silhouette of the network's mysterious leader remains pinned by a red string as the primary target. The panel displays dozens of complex connections created to track every single step of that dangerous criminal cell. The identity of the mysterious commander remains the biggest riddle left to solve. Ryu Kang-min tightly squeezes the small plastic capsule he found inside the treat. He observes the small toy figure of Jang Hyun-soo lying on the table, thinking about his rival's fate. The prota brings his fingers close to the miniature with a reflective look regarding the mission. The scene cuts to the grand front of a large university hospital in the city center. On the television in the hospital room, the news broadcast shows stories about the massive fallout from the video leak case near the IV pole. A shaky voice questions, if the police really still haven't managed to capture the person responsible for the attack. Jang Hyun-soo appears lying in the bed, all bandaged up and wearing a neck brace after surviving the serious traffic accident. The doctor in a white coat remains standing next to the bed, observing the news with a rather calm posture. The professional sharply tells the patient to keep quiet while messing with the IV equipment. Jang Hyun-soo gulps and looks startled at the man in the coat, feeling that there is something wrong there. He breaks into a cold sweat and tries to move, but his weakened body full of bruises does not respond to his commands. The doctor keeps staring at the motionless young man with a dark and intimidating look underneath his bangs. A slight and rather chilling smile appears on the coat-wearing professional's face. The doctor turns his attention back to the IV bag, leaving the patient even more tense with the suspicious silence. Suddenly, he removes a syringe containing a red liquid directly from the pocket of his coat. Without hesitating, he applies that unknown reddish substance directly into the IV infusion tube. The man displays a sinister and wild smile in the darkness of the room. Upon concluding the mysterious injection, Jang Hyun-soo watches horrified as that dark substance travels rapidly down toward his vein. He stammers in terror and asks if that man is truly a real doctor on duty. The red liquid spreads completely, mixing with the saline solution that feeds the injured man's body. The young man's eyes widen upon realizing the severity and the deadly danger of that extreme situation. Sunlight begins to enter through the room's window, indicating the arrival of the following morning. The doctor remains standing, observing the patient in the bed, who now appears to be completely unconscious. The empty syringe is left on top of the medical counter, with one last drop of the substance on the needle. He adjusts the equipment's valve with coldness, controlling the final flow of the medication. Jang Hyun-soo tries to thrash around desperately upon realizing that one of his hands is firmly handcuffed to the iron rail of the hospital bed. He sits up with a start, trying desperately to find a way to free himself from that nightmare. The heavy metal of the handcuff traps his injured wrist tightly, blocking any attempt to escape. The young man pulls the metal chain desperately and yells for help with all his might. In a complete panic, he screams, asking if that man in the coat is some sort of crazy person. The doctor just rests his hand on his chin and maintains a calm, mocking smile in the face of all that desperation from the young man. The force exerted on the handcuff causes the IV needle to irritate his vein even more, provoking a sharp pain. The fake doctor reveals himself to be another network agent, coldly displaying the organization's pin with a threatening gleam in his eye. Suddenly, Jang Hyun-soo's nose begins to bleed heavily due to the devastating effect of the substance running through his body. He suffers a violent spasm of pain while the substance begins to paralyze his nervous system completely. His fingers tremble without any control, losing all power to react in that final moment of agony. His hand finally collapses without strength onto the mattress of the bed with the end of his resistance. The network agent just observes him take his last breath before confirming the success of that quiet elimination. The scene cuts to the sunny streets filled with commercial high-rises. In an upscale area of the city, Ryu Kang-min appears in the middle of the pavement with an extremely alert gaze, watching the surroundings. He firmly holds the card with the network emblem, preparing for his next strategic step. An elegant man in a gray suit appears standing on the sidewalk, casually messing with his phone. Ryu Kang-min observes the movements of that suspicious man a few meters away, maintaining perfect cover. A young man with messy gray hair and a hooded jacket approaches him, scratching the back of his neck with a friendly smile on his face. The two begin to chat calmly in the middle of the street, acting as if they were just two old friends meeting up again. Ryu Kang-min approaches the gray-haired young man to obtain the necessary information for his next action in the city. The prota stares at him in a serious and piercing manner, leaving the young man quite intimidated by the coldness of that professional gaze. The gray-haired young man presses the remote control of his vehicle key, setting off a sharp beep that breaks the avenue's silence. Ryu Kang-min is startled to see a luxurious white car of the highest tier turn on its headlights right in front of him. His eyes widen in complete shock upon realizing the level of wealth and luxury of his new contact. In a totally wild and bizarre manner, the prota begins to lick the chrome metal hood ornament of the luxurious vehicle. The young man in the hoodie observes him with an expression of extreme secondhand embarrassment, while the kid hugs the vehicle dramatically. Shortly after, the luxury car begins to travel at high speed down the busy avenues of the city. In the back seat, Ryu Kang-min yells with pure joy and excitement over the incredible comfort of that luxurious ride. He throws himself from one side to the other in a dramatic way, leaving the young man in the hoodie visibly awkward and nervous about that childish behavior. The vehicle passes a large green sign indicating that they are crossing the boundary toward Gyeonggi province. The prota gestures with his hands and comments excitedly about how that is the best experience of his life. The gray-haired driver just gives a strained smile and tries to look past his passenger's madness so as not to lose his patience. The luxurious car keeps advancing in a grand manner. Through the lanes of the empty highway, the trip proceeds quietly and at high speed, distancing them further and further from the urban center of Seoul. The Rolls-Royce overtakes the other smaller vehicles on the road with total ease and elegance. Suddenly, the prota strikes up a conversation with the young man about the fragility of human life and how easily people fade away. The driver gives a discreet smirk on the corner of his lips upon hearing that reflective comment coming from the passenger. He adjusts his posture and assumes an even more enigmatic attitude, appearing to carry dark secrets. Ryu Kang-min stays silent for an instant, just observing the young man's calm reaction. The prota cracks a slight smile upon noticing that his companion is by no means an ordinary person. The gray-haired driver maintains his friendly and pleasant tone of voice, trying to keep the mood light between the two. From his seat, Ryu Kang-min keeps analyzing every tiny detail of the driver's behavior. Silence takes over the interior of the luxurious vehicle for a few moments, leaving the atmosphere quite heavy. The young man suddenly suspects something and turns his face with a very serious expression. He tries to focus on a specific detail he just noticed in the car cabin, letting out a confused whisper. His eye widens in absolute shock upon finally recognizing a very dangerous, familiar pattern. He locks his gaze directly onto the young man's digital wristwatch, realizing it is the exact same accessory worn by the staff member at the hospital. The gray-haired driver calmly extends his hand in the prota's direction, who stares at him on high alert. The young man in the hoodie reveals his true lethal identity, with a sinister smile and glowing red eyes, making it clear that Ryu Kang-min just stepped right into a deadly trap.